I'll never forget the moment I checked my bank account on Black Friday and saw $50,000 missing with a note that said, "Family gift." My hands shook as I drove to my parents' house thinking there'd been some mistake. But when I walked through that door, I found my mother, father and sister unboxing brand new iPhone 17 Pro Maxes, one for each of them, one for my aunt, one for my cousin. Everyone got the latest model. Everyone except me. When I asked what happened to my money, my mother didn't even pretend to be sorry. She actually smirked at me and said, "You make the most money in this family, Grace. Think of it as giving back to the people who raised you." I felt something inside me break. Not just my heart, something deeper. The part of me that had spent 30 years being the good daughter, the responsible one, the family ATM machine. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at my mother, at all of them, and said 5 words that would change everything. Fine, consider it my last gift. What they didn't know was that I'd already discovered the truth. I wasn't even their biological daughter. They'd been stealing from me for years. And my grandmother had left me an inheritance they'd hidden from me for 2 decades. By Christmas, when they opened the package I sent them, their faces turned white with terror. My phone lit up with 110 missed calls, but I never answered. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story about revenge. It's about the day I discovered who I really was and made sure everyone who betrayed me paid the price they deserved. And trust me, you won't believe how this ends. My name is Grace Chen, and at 30 years old, I thought I'd finally figured out how to build a life that was entirely my own. I'm a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company in Seattle, and after years of hard work and careful saving, I'd managed to put away exactly $73,482.99 in my personal savings account. That number wasn't just digits on a screen. It represented every late night I'd worked through exhaustion, every vacation I'd skipped, every small luxury I'd denied myself in the name of building something secure. Something that belonged only to me. It was a Friday evening in late November when everything changed. I'd just finished a brutal week debugging a critical system failure that had kept me at the office until nearly midnight most nights. My shoulders ached, my eyes burned from staring at code, and all I wanted was to order takeout, take a hot bath, and sleep for 12 hours straight. I was standing in line at my favorite Thai restaurant, absently scrolling through my phone while I waited for my order when I decided to check my bank balance. Just a routine glance, the kind of thing I did every few days out of habit. The number on the screen made no sense at first. I blinked, certain I was reading it wrong. $23,482.19. I refreshed the app. The number didn't change. My heart began to pound as I scrolled down to my recent transactions, and that's when I saw it, a withdrawal for exactly $50,000, dated that morning at 9:47 a.m. Next to the transaction amount in the memo field were 2 words and an emoji that made my blood run cold: family gift. My hands started shaking so badly, I nearly dropped my phone. This had to be fraud. It had to be. I immediately called the bank's fraud hotline, my voice tight with panic as I explained that someone had stolen $50,000 from my account. The customer service representative listened patiently, asked me to verify my identity, and then delivered the words that turned my panic into something much worse. "Ms. Chen, I'm looking at the transaction now. This withdrawal was made in person at our downtown branch by Margaret Chen, who is listed as a co-owner on this account. The withdrawal was completely legal and authorized." Margaret Chen. My mother. The restaurant noise faded into a distant buzz. I mumbled something about a mistake, ended the call, and stood there in the middle of the crowded restaurant feeling like the floor had just disappeared beneath my feet. My mother had access to my account because I'd added her years ago when I first started working back when I was 23 and still believed that family meant safety. She'd convinced me it was just for emergencies, that it would give her peace of mind to know she could help me if I ever needed it. I'd been too trusting, too eager to please, too desperate for her approval to see it for what it really was: access. I left my food order unclaimed and drove straight to my parents' house in the suburbs, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe there had been an emergency. Maybe someone was sick. Maybe there was some explanation that would make sense of this violation. I clung to those maybes like lifelines, even as a cold, knowing voice in the back of my mind whispered that I already knew the truth. Their house was lit up like Christmas had come early. I could see movement through the front window, hear laughter. My hands were still trembling as I rang the doorbell, trying to prepare myself for whatever I was about to find. My sister Claire opened the door, and I immediately noticed the brand new iPhone in her hand, still in its sleek packaging, halfway removed. "Oh, Grace, perfect timing," she said brightly, gesturing me inside. "We were just about to post photos. Come see what Mom got us." The living room looked like the aftermath of a shopping spree at an Apple store. My mother sat on the couch, surrounded by boxes, iPhones, a new MacBook Air, leather cases, AirPods, even an Apple Watch. Claire was bouncing excitedly as she showed off her new iPhone 17 Pro Max in deep purple. My father stood near the window holding an identical phone, but he wasn't smiling. When I walked in, he immediately looked away, his jaw tight. "Grace." My mother's voice was bright, cheerful, utterly shameless. "Look what I got for everyone. Isn't it wonderful? Black Friday deals were just too good to pass up." I stared at the boxes, doing quick mental math. iPhones, laptop accessories, easily $15,000 to $20,000 worth of equipment spread across the coffee table, and that was just what I could see. "Mom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the roaring in my ears. "I need to talk to you about the money you took from my account." She didn't even have the decency to look guilty. Instead, she waved her hand dismissively as if I were complaining about her borrowing a cup of sugar. "Oh, that. Well, Grace, you make the most money in this family. Think of it as giving back to the people who raised you, who sacrificed everything for you." She paused, then added with a little laugh, "Besides, what else are you going to spend it on? It's not like you have a husband or children to support." The words hit like a physical blow. Claire giggled nervously, still clutching her new phone. My father remained silent, a statue by the window. I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. Every cell in my body wanted to scream, to grab those phones and smash them against the wall, to demand she explain how she could justify stealing from her own daughter. But I didn't. Instead, I took a slow breath and felt something shift inside me, something cold and clear and utterly calm. "Fine," I said quietly, meeting my mother's eyes. "Consider it my last gift." The smile on her face flickered, slightly uncertain. I didn't wait for her response. I turned and walked out. My footsteps steady, my head high. Behind me, I heard Claire say something about me being dramatic, heard my mother's laugh resume. My father said nothing at all. I sat in my car in their driveway for a long moment, staring at my phone screen. The banking app was still open, showing that transaction, family gift, $50,000. The heart emoji felt like mockery now. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Then I wiped my eyes, opened my notes app, and typed 5 words that would become my mantra for the next year. Let's make it worth it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling, my mind refusing to quiet. $50,000. The number kept repeating itself like a mantra. But it wasn't really about the money. It was about what the theft represented, the final, undeniable proof of something I'd spent my entire life trying not to see. I got out of bed around 2 a.m. and pulled an old cardboard box from the back of my closet. Inside were remnants of my childhood faded report cards, school photos, a few trinkets I'd never had the heart to throw away. Near the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small trophy. The plaque read, "First Place Regional Science Fair, Grace Chen, 2009. I was 14 years old when I won that competition. I'd spent 3 months building a working water filtration system designed for communities without access to clean water. Every evening after school, I'd been in our garage testing prototypes, taking notes, refining my calculations. When they called my name at the awards ceremony, I felt something rare and precious. The pure satisfaction of knowing I'd earned something through my own merit. The trophy sat on my lap during the car ride home. Claire. 12 at the time, slouched in the seat beside me, her arms crossed. She'd entered a poster about recycling and hadn't placed. The silence in the car was broken only by her occasional sniffles and dramatic sighs. When we arrived home, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen while Dad and Claire went to the living room. Her voice was gentle, almost conspiratorial. "Grace, sweetheart, I need you to do something for me. I need you to give that trophy to your sister." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "But Mom, I won it. My name is engraved on it." "I know, honey, but look at how upset Claire is. She worked hard too, and you know how sensitive she can be. You're so strong, Grace. You don't need a trophy to prove how smart you are. But Claire needs this right now. She needs to feel special, to feel like she accomplished something." My mother touched my shoulder, her expression earnest. "This is what being a good big sister means. This is what family does. We lift each other up." I remember staring down at that trophy, at my name permanently etched into the metal, and feeling something crack inside my chest. But I was 14 and desperate for my mother's approval. I wanted to be the good daughter she described, the selfless sister who put others first. So I carried the trophy into the living room and handed it to Claire, my voice steady as I said she could keep it in her room. My mother beamed at me. "That's my girl. I'm so proud of you, Grace." Claire's face lit up as she clutched the trophy, already planning where to display it. My father looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between pity and resignation, but he said nothing. He never did. That trophy sat on Claire's shelf for years, a constant reminder of the lesson I'd learned: my achievements mattered less than everyone else's feelings. My role in the family was to be the strong one, the responsible one, the one who gave things up so others could shine. But the trophy was nothing compared to what came later. I was 18 in the spring of 2013 when the thick envelope from Yale arrived. My hands shook as I opened it, hardly daring to believe what I was reading. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to Yale University's class of 2017. They were offering me a partial scholarship, not a full ride, but enough that with loans and work study I could actually go. I'd actually gotten into Yale. I brought the letter to dinner that evening, my excitement barely contained. "Look," I said, sliding the acceptance across the table. "They accepted me." My father glanced at it and said, "That's wonderful, Grace," but his tone was oddly flat. My mother picked up the letter, read it slowly, then set it down with a tight smile. "Yale. That's in Connecticut, isn't it? So far from home." "I know," I said. "I can't believe I actually got in." That was Thursday. By the following Tuesday, my mother was ill. It started small headaches, fatigue moments where she'd grip the counter as if dizzy. Then came the doctor's appointments, the concerned phone calls I'd overhear, the way she'd press her hand to her chest and take slow, careful breaths. The doctors couldn't pinpoint anything specific, she told me, but clearly something was wrong. Tests were being run. More appointments were scheduled. "Don't worry about me," she said one evening, her voice weak as she lay on the couch. "You should still plan for Yale. Your father and Claire will manage somehow." But my father worked 10-hour days, managing a small accounting firm. Claire was still in high school, consumed with her own activities and social life. The unspoken reality settled over me like a weight. I was the responsible one. I was the one who could step up, who should step up. How could I possibly leave for Connecticut when my mother was genuinely sick? I called Yale's admissions office and requested a 1-year deferral. They granted it, sympathetic to my family circumstances. I'd stay home for a year, help my mother recover, then start college in 2014. It seemed like a reasonable plan, a temporary sacrifice. That year I worked part-time at a coffee shop, drove my mother to medical appointments that never yielded concrete diagnoses, helped with household chores, and watched my dream slowly slip away. The strangest thing was how my mother's health seemed to improve in small increments that perfectly paced themselves. She was well enough to host her book club by summer, well enough to go shopping with Claire by fall, well enough to volunteer at church events by winter. By the time I would have needed to confirm my enrollment for fall 2014, the deferral deadline had passed. When I mentioned contacting Yale again, my mother sighed and said, "Oh, honey, that ship has sailed. Besides, the University of Washington has an excellent computer science program, and you'll save so much money living at home." So I enrolled at UW. I told myself it was fine that I was being practical, that staying local was the mature choice. I graduated in 2018 with strong grades and no debt, landed a good job in Seattle, and built what appeared to be a successful life. I convinced myself I'd made peace with how things had turned out. Then came 2020. My parents were downsizing to a smaller house, and I'd volunteered to help them pack. I was sorting through my mother's closet, pulling out old coats for donation, when I found a shoebox tucked far in the back corner, hidden behind winter clothes that hadn't been worn in years. Inside were papers, old receipts, random documents, expired coupons. And there, folded carefully in a manila envelope, was my Yale acceptance letter. But it wasn't alone. There were other letters I'd never seen. Notifications about additional scholarship opportunities. A letter from Yale's financial aid office dated August 2013, explaining that I'd qualified for supplemental grants that would cover nearly 70% of my total costs. Information about work-study programs that would have made the remaining expenses manageable. A handwritten note from an admissions counselor expressing excitement about having me join their incoming class. I'd never seen any of these letters. My mother had intercepted every single one. I stood in that closet, my legs shaking, holding proof that my mother had systematically lied to me. She'd hidden information about financial aid that would have made Yale affordable. She'd manufactured an illness to keep me home. And when I'd stayed out of love and duty, she'd made certain I could never go back. From downstairs, I heard her call, "Grace, do you want some tea?" I carefully placed all the letters back in the shoebox and took it with me when I left that afternoon. I never mentioned finding it. I smiled, drank tea with her, helped pack boxes, and drove home with that shoebox sitting in my passenger seat, like evidence of a crime no one had bothered to name. Now, 2 years later, sitting alone in my apartment at 2 a.m. with that old science fair trophy in my hands, I pulled out the shoebox again. I opened the Yale acceptance letter, its edges yellowed now, and read those words one more time. "We are pleased to inform you." My tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink slightly, and I finally understood the full scope of what had been done to me. My entire life had been built on lies. Every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd surrendered, every time I'd swallowed my pain to keep the peace, it had all been orchestrated. I wasn't the strong daughter who'd chosen family over ambition. I was the one they'd convinced to choose nothing at all. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I made coffee, opened my laptop at the kitchen table, and logged into my bank account with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. If my mother had stolen $50,000 so casually, so brazenly, then this wasn't the first time. It couldn't be. I started by reviewing the account settings, something I realized with growing shame that I'd never actually done carefully. There it was, under account ownership, Margaret Chen listed as co-owner since June 2018. 7 years ago, right after I'd gotten my first real job out of college. The memory came back in fragments. I'd been so excited about my new position, my first real salary. My mother had taken me out to lunch to celebrate, and over salads, she'd said something about how proud she was, how grown up I was becoming. Then, almost as an afterthought, "You should add me to your new account, honey, just for emergencies. What if something happened to you and we needed to access your funds? It's what responsible adults do." I'd been 23, naive and desperate to prove I was the responsible adult she claimed I was becoming. We'd gone to the bank together that afternoon. I remembered signing papers, but I'd been distracted texting with a friend about weekend plans, barely glancing at what I was authorizing. My mother had been right there, helpful and encouraging, pointing to where I needed to sign. Now I clicked through to view the original account agreement, but the bank's online system only showed the current version. I needed the physical paperwork, the documents I'd signed 7 years ago. I called the bank's customer service line and requested copies of all original account opening documents from June 2018. "That'll take about 5 to 7 business days, Ms. Chen," the representative said. "We'll mail them to your address on file." "Can I pick them up in person? At the branch?" There was a pause, some keyboard clicking. "We can have them ready at the downtown branch by Monday afternoon if it's urgent." "It's urgent," I said. While I waited for Monday, I began combing through my transaction history going back as far as the online system would allow. At first, the withdrawals seemed innocuous. Small amounts here and there, always with reasonable-sounding descriptions. August 2018. $3,000 labeled Family Medical Emergency. October 2018, $1,500. Mom's car repair. December 2018, $4,000. Family holiday expenses. I created a spreadsheet logging every withdrawal that wasn't mine. The amounts varied, but the frequency was consistent every few months, sometimes just weeks apart. February 2019, $2,500. Help with mortgage. May 2019, $5,000. Claire's dental work. September 2019, $3,500. Family expenses. I worked through the entire morning and into the afternoon, my coffee growing cold beside me as the numbers mounted. By the time I reached 2024, my hands were shaking again, but this time not from shock, from rage. The total came to $197,400. I sat back from my laptop staring at that number. Nearly $200,000 siphoned from my account over 7 years. Money I'd earned through countless hours of work, late nights debugging code weekends spent on call. Money I'd assumed was safely accumulating, building toward a future, toward security. Instead, it had been steadily disappearing, paying for my family's lifestyle while I lived in a modest apartment and drove a 10-year-old Honda. The descriptions on the withdrawals were clearly fabricated. I'd never been told about any mortgage help, never heard about Claire's supposed dental work. These weren't emergencies I'd agreed to cover. These were systematic thefts dressed up in the language of family obligation. Monday afternoon, I drove to the downtown bank branch and requested the documents. The clerk returned with a thin folder containing the account opening paperwork from 2018. I sat in my car in the parking lot and opened it with trembling fingers. The signature page showed my name signed in my handwriting exactly as I remembered. But above my signature was a section detailing the co-owner's rights and privileges. I read it once, then again, my heart pounding. The text stated clearly, "Co-owner has unlimited withdrawal rights and full account access without requiring primary account holder's authorization for individual transactions." I pulled out my phone and found a photo I'd taken of my college graduation diploma, signed by me on the same month I'd opened this account. I held the two signatures side by side under the car's dome light. My signature was identical on both. But the ink wasn't. The text describing the co-owner's unlimited rights was in a slightly different shade of blue than the rest of the document. The line weight was marginally thicker. It had been added after the original document was printed, squeezed into a space that looked just slightly too cramped for the number of words it contained. I pulled out another document from the folder, a standard information sheet about account types. The ink color matched my signature perfectly. But that one line, that crucial line giving my mother unlimited access to my money, was in different ink entirely. Someone had altered this contract after I'd signed it. I flipped through the other pages and found a transaction authorization form also from June 2018, listing my mother as an authorized user. The signature at the bottom looked like mine at first glance. The letters were formed similarly, the spacing nearly identical. But I'd been signing my name for 30 years. I knew the precise pressure I used on the downstroke of the G, the specific loop I made in the lowercase e. This signature was close, expertly close, but it wasn't mine. The G was slightly too angular. The N at the end of Chen had a tail that extended just a bit too far. I sat in that parking lot holding evidence of forgery and whispered to the empty car, "How long have you been stealing from me?" The answer I now knew was from the very beginning. From the moment I'd gotten my first real paycheck, my mother had been planning this, and I'd made it so easy for her. I drove home from the bank and made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to confront them, not yet. Confrontation was what the old Grace would have done, tearful, emotional begging for explanations that would never satisfy. The old Grace would have demanded apologies and believed promises to change. But the old Grace had lost nearly $200,000 by being trusting and compliant. The new Grace was going to be smart. That Sunday, I showed up for family dinner as usual. My mother opened the door looking slightly wary, as if she'd expected me to skip it after our last encounter. But I smiled warmly and handed her the bottle of wine I'd brought, just like always. "Grace, sweetheart," she said, relaxing visibly. "I'm so glad you came. I was worried you were upset about the other day." "Of course not, Mom," I said, keeping my voice light. "Family helps family, right? That's what you always taught me." Over pot roast and mashed potatoes, I listened to Claire complain about her job search, nodded sympathetically when my mother mentioned needing new living room furniture, and said nothing when my father barely spoke 3 words the entire meal. I was pleasant, agreeable, forgettable. Exactly what they expected. As I was leaving, I heard my mother say to Claire in the kitchen, her voice just loud enough to carry, "See, I told you she'd get over it. She always does. Grace won't do anything. She never does." I smiled to myself as I walked to my car. Let her think that. Over the next 2 weeks, I became meticulous. I photographed every document from the bank, making sure the different ink colors were clearly visible under good lighting. I saved every text message my mother had ever sent me, asking for money, every voicemail where she'd casually mentioned needing help with bills. I created a detailed timeline spreadsheet with dates, amounts, and her explanations for each withdrawal. I scanned the Yale letters, the scholarship notifications. She'd hidden my grandmother's acceptance letter. I bought a small fireproof safe and stored physical copies of everything. I backed up digital files to 3 separate cloud services. I was building something that couldn't be denied, couldn't be explained away, couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding between family members. At work, I was productive and focused, channeling my anger into code that practically wrote itself. My colleagues commented that I seemed energized, motivated. They had no idea that every line of code I wrote, every problem I solved, was fueled by a cold fury that had finally found direction. I kept attending Sunday dinners, kept playing the role of the dutiful daughter, and watched my family relax more each week. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They thought I was weak. Then, 3 weeks after I'd found the forged documents, I received an email that changed everything. It arrived on a Wednesday evening while I was reviewing bank statements on my couch. The sender's address was a string of random letters and numbers at an encrypted email service I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. For a moment I thought it was spam, but something made me open it. The message was brief. "You're not the only one they've stolen from. Your grandmother wanted you to have everything. Ask about the house on Maple Street." There was no signature, no identifying information. I read it 3 times, my heart racing. Maple Street. I knew that address. My grandmother Margaret had lived there before she died in 2005, back when I was 10 years old. I had vague memories of visiting her there, of a cozy house with a big front porch and a garden she'd tended carefully. After she died, my parents had said the house was sold to pay for her medical bills and funeral expenses. But this email suggested something different. It suggested my grandmother had wanted me to have that house. And if this stranger was right, if I wasn't the only one they'd stolen from, then what else had my parents taken that was meant for me? I stared at the email for a long time, weighing whether to respond. This could be anything. A scam, a cruel joke, someone with an agenda I couldn't understand. But the mention of my grandmother felt too specific, too knowing. Whoever sent this knew something about my family, something real. I hit reply and typed just 3 words, "Who are you?" Then I sent it and waited. For 3 days, I checked my email obsessively. Every notification made my pulse spike. I refreshed my inbox during meetings, during lunch breaks, in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. Nothing came. I began to think I'd imagined the whole thing, that I'd replied to a one-time automated message that would never respond. Then on Saturday morning, while I was drinking coffee and pretending to read the news, my phone chimed. New email from the same encrypted address. My hands shook as I opened it. The message contained no explanation, no details, no elaboration, just 3 words that made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. Someone they used. I set down my phone, carefully stood up from my kitchen table, and walked to the window. Outside, the Seattle rain fell in its familiar steady rhythm. Somewhere in this city was a person who knew what my family had done, who had perhaps suffered as I had, who was reaching out across the distance to tell me I wasn't alone in this. I picked up my phone again and typed a new reply. Tell me everything. This time, I didn't have to wait 3 days. The response came within an hour, and when I read it, I realized that what I'd uncovered so far was just the beginning. Thanksgiving arrived with the kind of gray, drizzly weather that Seattle does best. I'd spent the morning cooking dishes for dinner at my parents' house, a green bean casserole, sweet potato pie, homemade cranberry sauce, telling myself that maintaining appearances was part of my strategy. The anonymous emailer had sent more messages over the past week, each one carefully vague but hinting at deeper secrets about my grandmother's estate. I still didn't know who they were, but they'd advised me to watch and wait, document everything, and trust no one in that house. So I arrived at my parents' home at 3 o'clock with my arms full of dishes and my phone tucked in my pocket set to record audio. My mother greeted me at the door wearing a new cashmere sweater I definitely hadn't seen before, her wrists jangling with silver bracelets that caught the light. "Grace, darling, come in. Everyone's already here." She took the sweet potato pie from my hands without offering to help with the rest. "Oh, this looks lovely. You're so talented in the kitchen. I keep telling everyone my Grace can do anything she puts her mind to." The house was full of relatives, my Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert, my mother's sister Diane and her husband, a few cousins I barely knew. They were gathered in the living room, and I noticed immediately that nearly everyone was holding or admiring new devices. My cousin Jessica showed off her iPhone to Aunt Diane. Uncle Robert was setting up his new iPad. Even my grandmother's old friend Mrs. Patterson, who must have been close to 80, held a sleek new phone she clearly had no idea how to use. My mother moved through the room like a gracious hostess accepting compliments with practiced humility. "Oh, you know how it is. Grace does so well at her job and she's always been generous with family. When she heard about the Black Friday sales, she insisted on helping everyone upgrade their technology. She said, 'Mom family should have the best.' Didn't you, Grace?" Every eye in the room turned to me. I forced my smile to stay pleasant warm even. Of course. Family is everything. The praise came in waves after that. How thoughtful I was. How successful. How lucky my parents were to have such a caring daughter. I accepted it all with grace, poured wine, helped serve appetizers, and played my role perfectly. Inside, I was cataloging every word, every assumption, every casual mention of my supposed generosity. They all believed I'd willingly funded this shopping spree. My mother had created a narrative where I was the wealthy, childless daughter spreading my abundance to those less fortunate. Dinner itself was an elaborate production. The table groaned under the weight of turkey ham, multiple casseroles, fresh rolls, and 3 different kinds of pie. My mother made a toast before we ate, raising her wine glass with tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm so grateful for family. For daughters who understand that success means nothing if you can't share it with the people who love you." She looked directly at me. "Grace, you make me so proud." Everyone clinked glasses. I sipped my wine and said nothing. After dinner, I was in the kitchen loading the dishwasher when Claire wandered in, her new iPhone in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. She'd had several glasses already, and her words had taken on that sharp edge they always got when she drank. "Must be nice," she said, leaning against the counter. "Being everyone's hero." I kept rinsing plates. I'm just helping family. Right. Family. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. You know why you're still single, Grace? Why you'll probably always be single? I didn't answer, but she continued anyway. Because you'll never have a family of your own. You're 30 years old and you've never even had a serious relationship. That's why you have all that money sitting around, nothing else to spend it on. No husband, no kids, no real life. Just work and this pathetic need to buy everyone's love. The words landed exactly where she intended them to, striking at fears I rarely let myself acknowledge. The empty apartment I returned to every night. The dating apps I'd downloaded and deleted a dozen times. The creeping worry that maybe I'd sacrificed so much for my family that I'd forgotten how to build anything for myself. I set down the plate I'd been holding, turned to face her, and kept my voice perfectly calm. Are you finished? Something in my tone must have surprised her because she blinked suddenly, uncertain. Before she could respond, I walked past her and back into the living room. That's when I noticed Linda watching me. Not my Aunt Linda. This was Linda Patterson, the elderly woman I'd always known as my mother's old friend. She sat in the corner chair, her new phone forgotten in her lap, her pale blue eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe, or recognition. As guests began gathering their coats and saying their goodbyes, Linda approached me slowly. Her hand shook slightly as she pressed something into my palm, a cloth napkin folded small. "Thank you for dinner, dear," she said loudly enough for others to hear. Then so quietly, only I could catch it. "Read it in private." I slipped the napkin into my pocket and helped her with her coat, my heart hammering. After she left, I excused myself to the bathroom and unfolded the napkin carefully. Written in shaky but deliberate handwriting were 4 words: "Garden, 5 minutes." I flushed the toilet for effect, washed my hands, and made my excuses about needing fresh air. The November evening was cold and damp, the garden dark except for the porch light's dim reach. I stood on the wet grass, my breath forming clouds in the chill air, wondering if I'd misunderstood. Then Linda emerged from the shadows near my mother's rose bushes, moving surprisingly quickly for a woman her age. She glanced back at the house to make sure no one was watching, then turned to me with eyes that held decades of pain. "I got your reply," she whispered. "To the email." My breath caught. Linda. The anonymous messenger was Linda. "They did it to me, too," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "Your grandmother was my best friend. I watched what your mother did after Margaret died, how she twisted everything, took everything. But what they did to you, Grace," her voice broke, "what they've been doing to you is so much worse." Linda spoke for 20 minutes in that cold garden, her words tumbling out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back for years. She told me about my grandmother Margaret, about a friendship that had spanned 40 years, about secrets and promises and betrayals that had festered in silence. But when I pressed her for specifics about the house on Maple Street, about what exactly had been taken from me, she shook her head. "I don't have proof, only suspicions and things Margaret told me before she got sick. You need someone who can access legal records, court documents, someone who knows how to build a real case." She gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you'll find a lawyer you can trust. Promise me you won't confront them until you know everything." I promised, and Linda disappeared back into the shadows, leaving me standing alone in the November darkness, with more questions than answers. The next morning, I scrolled through my phone contacts until I found a name I hadn't called in nearly 3 years: Julia Okonkwo. We'd been friends in college, both computer science majors who'd bonded over late-night study sessions and a shared hatred of our algorithm design professor. But while I'd gone into software development, Julia had surprised everyone by switching to law school after graduation. She'd sent me a card when she passed the bar, letting me know she'd joined a family law practice in downtown Seattle. I'd meant to stay in better touch, but life had gotten busy, and our friendship had faded into the occasional liked social media post. Now I needed her expertise more than I'd ever needed anything. I texted her first, keeping it casual. "Hey stranger, long time no talk. Any chance you're free for coffee this week? I could use some legal advice." Her response came within an hour. "Grace? Yes, tomorrow at 10. There's a place near my office." We met at a quiet cafe in the financial district, one of those places where lawyers conducted informal meetings over expensive lattes. Julia looked polished and professional in a tailored navy suit. Her hair pulled back in a sleek bun, but her smile when she saw me was warm and genuine. "It's so good to see you," she said, hugging me quickly before we sat down. Though I have to admit, legal advice has me curious. "What's going on?" I'd prepared for this moment, organized my thoughts, but sitting across from her in that cafe, I found myself struggling to know where to begin. Finally, I just started talking. I told her about the $50,000, about discovering the joint account and the altered contract. I showed her the photographs I'd taken of the documents with the different colored ink. I explained about the nearly $200,000 stolen over 7 years, about the Yale letters my mother had hidden about Linda's cryptic warnings in the garden. Julia listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. She took notes on a legal pad, asking occasional clarifying questions about dates and amounts. When I finally finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a long breath. "Grace, this is financial abuse. Systematic, deliberate financial abuse. The forged signature alone is a criminal offense." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "But something about this feels bigger than just theft. The way your mother has controlled you, isolated you, manipulated every major decision in your life, there's a pattern here that goes beyond opportunistic stealing. Linda said my grandmother left me something, a house on Maple Street. But I don't know if that's true or how to verify it." Julia leaned forward, her eyes intent. "Let me run a full background check on your family's legal history. Property transfers, court filings, probate records, anything that's public record. If your grandmother left you an inheritance that was stolen, there will be a paper trail." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Grace, I need to ask you something. Have you ever seen your birth certificate?" The question caught me off guard. "I mean, I must have at some point. For my driver's license, my passport." "Why, humor me. Do you know where it is now? Could you get your hands on the original?" I thought about it and realized I had no idea where my birth certificate was. My mother had always handled those kinds of documents when I was younger, and I'd simply never thought to ask for it as an adult. "I don't have it. My parents probably do in their files somewhere." Julia made another note. "Okay. Give me a week. Let me pull what I can from public records. Don't say anything to your family yet. Just keep doing what you've been doing. Stay quiet. Stay observant. Document everything." The week that followed was the longest of my life. I went to work, attended another Sunday dinner where my mother bragged to my father about how the Thanksgiving gathering had gone so well, and waited for Julia's call. I checked my phone compulsively, jumped at every notification, barely slept. Finally, on a gray Wednesday afternoon, Julia texted, "Can you come to my office now? I found something." I left work early, driving through rain-slicked streets to her building downtown. Her assistant showed me to a small conference room where Julia sat, surrounded by folders and loose papers. Her face was pale, and when she looked up at me, I saw something in her expression that made my stomach drop. "Sit down," she said quietly. I sat. She slid a manila folder across the polished conference table. "I started with property records for the Maple Street house, like you asked. Your grandmother Margaret Chen owned it from 1978 until her death in 2005. According to the original will filed with the county in 2003, she left that house specifically to you to be held in trust until you turned 21. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of property deeds, transfer documents, and legal filings I didn't fully understand. But in January 2005, 6 months before Margaret died, someone petitioned the court to have her declared mentally incompetent. The petition was filed by her daughter Margaret Chen Jr., who goes by Margaret. Julia pointed to a document. Your mother. She claimed your grandmother had dementia and was no longer capable of managing her own affairs. She was granted temporary guardianship. I was 10 years old, I whispered. I remember my grandmother being sick, but I didn't know. Once your mother had guardianship, she transferred the house into her own name. Then, 3 months after your grandmother died, she sold it for $180,000. Julia's voice was tight with controlled anger. The proceeds went into an account in your mother's name. You never saw a penny of it. I stared at the documents, trying to process what I was reading. My grandmother had wanted me to have that house, had put it in writing, and my mother had stolen it through legal manipulation. But that's not all I found, Julia said softly. She pulled out another folder, this one thinner. When I was going through court records related to your grandmother's estate, I found something else. Something I think you need to see before we go any further. She opened the folder and slid a single document across the table. It was old, the paper slightly yellowed, dated December 14, 1995. At the top, in official letterhead, were the words, Certificate of Adoption, King County, Washington. I picked it up with numb fingers and read the names listed. Child's name, Grace Margaret Chen. Birth date, May 14, 1995. Adoptive parent, Margaret Chen, Jr. Biological mother, Linda Marie Patterson. Deceased. Father unknown. The conference room tilted. I read it again, certain I was misunderstanding. Linda Patterson. The woman in my mother's garden. The anonymous emailer. The one who'd said my grandmother was her best friend. Julia's voice came from very far away. Grace, I'm so sorry. I don't know how you didn't know this, but according to these records, you're not your mother's biological daughter. Your biological mother died in childbirth. Your grandmother Margaret arranged for her daughter to adopt you. I looked up at Julia, saw the pity and anger warring in her expression, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. All those years of feeling like I never quite belonged, like I was always trying to earn a love that should have been freely given. Suddenly, it all made a terrible kind of sense. Julia reached across the table and gripped my hand. You need to see this, she said, her voice shaking. You're not her biological daughter. And I think that's why she's never loved you. I sat in Julia's conference room for a long time after she showed me the adoption certificate, staring at the names printed on that official document. Linda Marie Patterson, deceased. My biological mother had a name, a real name, and she died bringing me into this world. The woman I'd been calling Mom for 30 years had taken me in not out of love but out of obligation or convenience or perhaps some calculated plan I was only beginning to understand. Julia let me sit in silence occasionally, refilling my water glass, giving me space to process. Finally, I looked up at her and asked the question that mattered most. What do I do now? She leaned forward, her expression fierce. We build a case, a real one. We document everything, gather evidence, and when the time is right, we hit them with everything at once. But Grace, you can't let them know you're planning anything. You have to keep playing the part of the compliant daughter. I can do that, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I've been doing it my whole life. Over the next week, Julia and I strategized. She advised me to create opportunities for my mother to reveal her true nature, to document her entitlement and her assumptions about my money. The more evidence we have of ongoing financial abuse and her expectation of access to your funds, the stronger our case becomes, she explained. We need to show a pattern, not just isolated incidents. That's when I came up with the bonus idea. The following Sunday, I arrived at family dinner with a carefully rehearsed plan. My mother was in the kitchen when I walked in, stirring something on the stove. My father sat in his usual chair reading the newspaper, and Claire was scrolling through her phone on the couch. I set down the wine I'd brought and said casually, "You'll never guess what happened at work this week." My mother turned from the stove immediately, her interest piqued by my tone. "What, honey?" My boss called me into his office on Friday. Apparently, the project I've been leading exceeded all their expectations. The client is thrilled and corporate decided to give our entire team bonuses. I paused for effect, watching my mother's face. My share might be around $80,000. The change in her expression was instantaneous. Her eyes widened, then practically glittered with interest. She set down her spoon and came toward me, wiping her hands on a dish towel. 80,000, Grace, that's wonderful. When do you get it? Probably mid-December, before the holidays. I kept my tone light, as if we were discussing something inconsequential. Claire looked up from her phone, suddenly attentive. Wow, Grace, that's amazing. What are you going to do with all that money? It was the exact question I'd been waiting for. I shrugged, playing it casual. I haven't really thought about it. Maybe invest some, save some? I don't know. Well, Christmas is coming up, my mother said, her voice taking on that particular tone I'd learned to recognize over the years, the one that sounded generous, but was actually making a claim. It would be wonderful to have a really special family Christmas this year. We could all go on a trip together, maybe somewhere warm. Wouldn't that be lovely? I smiled and said something non-committal about it being a nice idea, then changed the subject. But I'd seen what I needed to see. The calculation in my mother's eyes, the immediate assumption that my bonus was somehow communal property, the way she'd already started planning how to spend money I hadn't even received yet. That evening back in my apartment, I called Julia and told her about the dinner conversation. She was quiet for a moment, then said, Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to create a realistic-looking bonus check for you. Just for documentation purposes, you understand. We'll photograph it in a way that makes it clear it's a prop. But to the casual observer on social media, it'll look real. Post it to Facebook, tag your family, and let's see what happens. 2 days later, Julia brought me the check. It was printed on high-quality paper with a watermark made out to me for $80,000, with her law firm's account information and a notation that read, "For documentation purposes only, not a negotiable instrument," in tiny print along the bottom edge that wouldn't show up in a photo. I staged the photo carefully in my apartment's best natural light, the check positioned on my kitchen table with my laptop visible in the background as if I'd just been working. I made sure the tiny legal disclaimer wasn't visible in the frame. Then I posted it to Facebook with a simple caption, "Blessed and grateful, hard work really does pay off." I tagged my mother, my father, and Claire, then set my phone down and waited. The response was faster than I'd anticipated. Within 20 minutes, my mother had liked the post. Within 40 minutes, she'd commented, "So proud of you, sweetheart. Remember, family is everything. Don't forget to save some for the people who've always been there for you." I stared at that comment, at the casual entitlement embedded in every word, and felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. She couldn't help herself. Even publicly, even where friends and colleagues could see she had to stake her claim to my money. The comments kept coming. Aunt Diane. "Congratulations, Grace. Your mother must be so proud." My mother's response, "I certainly am. Grace knows how important family is." Claire posted a string of celebration emojis with the words, "Yay, sis, let's celebrate soon." I screenshot every single comment, every like, every share. I documented the timestamp of each interaction. When my phone buzzed with a text from my mother saying, "Can't wait to talk about Christmas plans, so many fun ideas." I screenshot that too. Julia had been right. My mother couldn't resist showing her true colors even in public. She was so confident in her control over me, so certain I would never challenge her, that she didn't bother hiding her expectations. She commented as if she had a right to my earnings, as if my bonus was a family windfall rather than compensation for my individual work. That night, I sat at my computer and created a new folder labeled Evidence, Financial Abuse Pattern. Inside, I organized everything chronologically. The bank statements showing years of unauthorized withdrawals, the altered account documents, the screenshots of my mother's public comments, the text messages. Julia had already added the legal documents about my grandmother's house and the adoption records. I opened the latest screenshot, the one showing my mother's Facebook comment with its presumptuous winking emoji, and I couldn't help myself. I whispered to my phone screen to that digital evidence of her greed and entitlement. Gotcha. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother. By the way, I told some friends at church about your bonus. They all think it's so wonderful that you're doing so well. I said you've always been generous with family. I hope that's okay. I typed back. Of course, Mom. Family comes first, just like you taught me. Then I screenshot that exchange too and added it to the folder. Every word she wrote, every assumption she made, every public declaration of her entitlement to my money was another piece of evidence. She was building my case for me one greedy comment at a time, and she had no idea. The Facebook post about my bonus had done exactly what Julia and I had hoped. My mother's entitled comments were now permanently documented, visible to dozens of people, impossible to deny or explain away. But I needed more than social media evidence. I needed to understand the full scope of what had been done to me, and more importantly, who had been complicit in it. The following Sunday, I arrived at my parents' house 15 minutes early, something I never normally did. I wanted to catch them off guard to see what happened when they thought I wasn't listening. I parked down the street and walked to the house, quietly letting myself in through the front door with the key I'd had since high school. Voices drifted from the kitchen, my mother's and Claire's speaking in tones just low enough that they clearly thought they were alone. I stayed in the hallway, my phone already recording in my pocket. I still can't believe she just accepted it, Claire was saying. $80,000 and she's not even suspicious. My mother laughed and the sound made my skin crawl. Grace has never been suspicious about anything. She's too trusting, too desperate to believe we actually care about her. There was a pause, the sound of cabinet doors opening and closing. Although I did worry for a moment after Thanksgiving. She had this look in her eyes when she left. I thought maybe she was finally going to push back. What if she finds out about the Yale letter? Claire's voice held a note of concern. If she ever saw those scholarship notifications you hid, she'd realize. She won't find them. My mother interrupted, her voice sharp and certain. And even if she did, what would she do? Grace is too weak to ever fight back. She'll just cry and feel hurt, and eventually forgive us like she always does. That's who she is. That's who we made her. I stood frozen in that hallway, my hand pressed against the wall to steady myself. The casual cruelty in my mother's voice, the certainty with which she dismissed any possibility of my resistance, the way she said, "That's who we made her," as if I were a project they'd successfully molded it, took every ounce of self-control not to walk into that kitchen and confront them both. Instead, I waited another minute, then loudly opened and closed the front door as if I'd just arrived. "Hello, anyone home?" "Grace." "We're in the kitchen, sweetheart." My mother's voice transformed instantly into something warm and welcoming, as if the conversation I'd just overheard had never happened. I walked in to find both of them smiling at me. My mother was arranging flowers in a vase, and Claire sat at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone. Neither of them showed any sign of guilt or awareness that they'd just been discussing how easily they could manipulate me. Dinner was excruciating. I sat at the table pushing food around my plate while my mother talked about her plans for Christmas, dropping hints about how nice it would be to go somewhere warm, maybe rent a beach house for the family. "Now that you have that wonderful bonus coming," she said brightly, "we could really do something special this year." But it was my father who captured my attention. He sat at the head of the table, silent as usual. But there was something different about his silence tonight. He wasn't just quiet. He looked haunted. He barely touched his food, cut his pot roast into smaller and smaller pieces without eating any of it. When I tried to catch his eye, he looked away quickly, his jaw tight. My mother made another comment about the bonus, something about how generous I was to share my success with family, and I watched my father flinch. It was subtle, just a slight tightening around his eyes, but I saw it clearly. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd always known everything my mother had done, every manipulation, every theft, every lie. And he'd said nothing. He'd sat in his silence and let it all happen because confronting her would have required a courage he didn't possess. The realization hit me with unexpected force. I'd spent so much energy focusing on my mother's cruelty and Claire's complicity that I'd almost given my father a pass as if his passivity made him innocent. But silence in the face of abuse wasn't innocence. It was cowardice. And in some ways, his cowardice had enabled everything else. After dinner, as I gathered my things to leave, I approached him in the hallway while my mother and Claire were still in the kitchen. He was putting on his reading glasses, preparing to retreat to his study the way he always did. "Dad," I said quietly, "can we have coffee tomorrow, just the two of us? There's something I need to ask you." The glasses slipped from his fingers. He caught them clumsily, and when he looked at me, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock, the diner on 5th Street. "Thank you," I said, and turned to leave. I was halfway to my car when I heard the front door open behind me. I turned to see my father standing on the porch backlit by the house lights. His shoulders slumped in a posture of defeat. He raised one hand as if to wave, then dropped it back to his side. His voice carried across the lawn barely above a whisper, but I heard it clearly in the quiet evening air. "I'm sorry, Gracie." I stood there waiting for him to elaborate, to explain what he was apologizing for, to finally show some backbone and tell me the truth. But he just stood there looking at me with those sad, guilty eyes, and I realized he wasn't going to say anything more. Not here. Not now. Maybe not ever. I got in my car and drove away, watching him in my rearview mirror as he remained on that porch, a silhouette of regret and cowardice. My phone was still recording in my pocket, preserving my mother's cruel words about making me weak, about my inability to fight back. Tomorrow, I would meet my father and see if he had the courage to be honest with me. But as I drove through the dark streets toward my apartment, I wasn't hopeful. A man who had spent 30 years watching his daughter be abused and said nothing wasn't likely to find his voice now, no matter how sorry he claimed to be. I arrived at the diner on 5th Street 10 minutes early and took a booth in the back corner where we could talk without being overheard. The place was nearly empty on a Monday morning, just a few regulars at the counter nursing coffee and reading newspapers. I ordered tea I didn't want and weighted my stomach tight with anticipation and dread. My father arrived exactly at 10, looking like he hadn't slept. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes red-rimmed, and he'd cut himself shaving. He slid into the booth across from me without meeting my eyes, ordered black coffee from the waitress, and sat in silence until she walked away. "I don't know where to start," he finally said, his voice rough. "Start with the truth," I replied. "All of it. No more silence." He laughed bitterly at that, a sound without any humor. "The truth. God grace, I've been silent for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to tell the truth." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup as if trying to warm himself despite the heated diner. "But you deserve to know. You've always deserved to know." What came out over the next 40 minutes was a story of weakness, regret, and systematic control that made my mother's theft of my money seem almost minor by comparison. My father told me that when I was 10 years old, he'd had an affair with a woman from his office. It had lasted 6 months before my mother discovered it by reading his emails. Instead of leaving him or even confronting him directly, she'd done something much more calculating. "She sat me down one night after you and Claire were asleep," he said, staring into his coffee. "She told me exactly how it was going to be. I could stay married to her and do everything she said, or she would make sure everyone knew about the affair. My boss, my clients, everyone at church, all our friends. She said she'd take the house, take you girls, turn you both against me, and make sure I lost everything." His voice cracked. "I was a coward, Grace. I chose to stay and stay silent rather than lose you." But staying silent had meant complicity in everything that followed. He'd watched my mother hide the Yale acceptance letters, orchestrate her fake illness to keep me home, and systematically drain my bank account. He'd known about all of it, and done nothing because speaking up would have meant confronting the woman who held his entire life in her hands. "I started recording her about 5 years ago. He continued pulling a small USB drive from his jacket pocket. His hands shook as he placed it on the table between us. I told myself I was gathering evidence that someday I'd have the courage to leave to expose what she really is. But I never did. Every time I got close, I'd think about losing you and Claire, about the humiliation, about starting over with nothing. He pushed the USB toward me. But you're stronger than me, Gracie. You always have been. Maybe you can do what I couldn't. I picked up the USB, feeling its weight in my palm. What's on here? Conversations. Recordings of her talking to Claire when she thought I couldn't hear. Recordings of her on the phone with her sister bragging about how easy it is to control you. There's one from last year where she says, he stopped, closing his eyes as if the memory physically pained him. She says that if you ever turn on her, she'll destroy you completely. That she has ways of making you look unstable, unreliable. That no one would believe you over her. The waitress refilled our cups, and I waited until she was out of earshot before speaking again. Tell me about Grandmother Margaret. The truth about what happened when she died. My father's face crumpled. Margaret was the best person I've ever known. She loved you so much, Grace. When she found out about your mother's affair with manipulating you, with treating you like property, she tried to protect you. She set up a trust fund from the sale of some stocks, about $40,000. She wanted you to have it when you turned 18, wanted it to pay for college wherever you wanted to go. What happened to it? Your mother found out about the trust when Margaret got sick. She convinced doctors that Margaret was suffering from dementia, that she wasn't competent to manage her finances. She got herself appointed as guardian, and once she had control... He shook his head. She dissolved the trust, took the money. Then she had Margaret's will changed. Your grandmother had wanted you to have the house on Maple Street, wanted you to know the truth about your adoption, wanted you raised knowing that your biological mother, Linda, had loved you, even though she died giving birth to you. I gripped my teacup so hard I thought it might shatter. Linda Patterson, my biological mother. He looked up sharply. You know about Linda? I know some, not enough. Linda was Margaret's daughter from a previous relationship years before she married and had your mother. She got pregnant young, and the father wanted nothing to do with the baby. Margaret asked her older daughter, your adoptive mother, to raise you as her own, to give you a stable home. Margaret thought her daughter would love you, would give you the life Linda wanted for you. His voice turned bitter. Instead, she saw you as a burden, as something she was owed compensation for taking on. The diner suddenly felt too hot, too close. I needed air, but forced myself to stay seated to hear everything. Why didn't you ever tell me any of this? Because I'm weak, he said simply. Because your mother threatened that if I ever told you the truth about anything, the adoption, the trust fund, the manipulation, she'd make sure I never saw you again. She'd claim I was mentally unstable, trying to turn you against her. And I believed her because she's always been smarter than me, always 3 steps ahead. He looked at me directly for the first time since sitting down. I failed you, Grace. Every single day for 30 years I failed you. And I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover what I feel. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then I picked up the USB drive and slipped it into my purse. I need to go. Grace, thank you for this, I said, standing, for finally telling me. But I can't process all of this right now with you sitting here. He nodded, defeated. I understand. I left him in that booth, left him with his cold coffee and his decades of regret, and drove home in a daze. Once inside my apartment, I sat on my couch for a full 10 minutes, just staring at the USB drive before I had the courage to plug it into my laptop. The file directory showed dozens of audio recordings organized by date. I clicked on the most recent one dated 3 weeks ago and pressed play. My mother's voice filled my apartment, crystal clear and utterly cold. She's not even my real daughter. She owes me everything for taking her in when no one else wanted her. If Grace thinks she can just keep all that money to herself, she's even more stupid than I thought. Claire's voice responded, younger and uncertain. But Mom isn't that kind of what Fair Grace wouldn't have anything without us. We gave her a home, a family, a name. The least she can do is share what she has. And if she ever figures out what we've done and tries to fight back, I'll destroy her. I have ways of making her look like an ungrateful, mentally unstable liar. Who do you think people will believe? The devoted mother who raised an adopted child as her own, or the bitter daughter who's clearly having some kind of breakdown? I sat there as the recording continued as my mother outlined her various backup plans for controlling me, for taking more money, for ensuring I remained compliant and useful. When it finally ended, I closed my laptop and sat in the silence of my apartment, letting the full weight of everything settle over me. My father had given me weapons. Julia had given me legal strategies. Linda had given me truth. And my mother, in her arrogance and certainty that I would never fight back, had given me all the evidence I needed to bring her entire world crashing down. I spent 2 weeks listening to every recording on that USB drive, cross-referencing them with the documents Julia had gathered, building a timeline of deception that stretched back decades. With each new piece of evidence, my resolve hardened. My mother had spent 30 years constructing an elaborate facade of devoted motherhood while systematically exploiting me. Now it was time to dismantle that facade brick by carefully placed brick. When the invitation to my mother's annual Christmas party arrived in my mailbox, embossed on expensive cardstock she'd probably charged to one of my old credit cards, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Julia and I met 3 days before the party to finalize our plan. We assembled a gift box containing printed copies of bank statements, the altered account contracts with the different ink clearly highlighted transcripts of the most damning audio recordings, and a letter from Julia's law firm outlining the legal violations my mother had committed. At the bottom of the box, we placed the USB drive itself along with a small Bluetooth speaker already paired to it. "Are you sure about this?" Julia asked as we wrapped the box in elegant silver paper. "Once you do this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your family will be permanently destroyed." I thought about my mother's voice on those recordings, about the casual cruelty with which she discussed destroying me if I ever fought back. I thought about the Yale letters hidden in her closet, about my grandmother's trust fund stolen, and spent about 30 years of being told I owed them everything for the privilege of being raised by people who had never loved me. "It's already destroyed," I said. "I'm just making it official." The night of the party, I dressed carefully in a deep green dress that made me look confident and successful. I did my makeup with precision, styled my hair, and practiced my smile in the mirror until it looked natural. Then I picked up the silver-wrapped box and drove to my parents' house. The place was transformed. White lights twinkled from every surface, a massive Christmas tree dominated the living room, and the scent of expensive catering filled the air. I recognized the decorations from high-end catalogs, the kind of Christmas display that cost thousands of dollars to create. My money, of course, funding yet another performance of family perfection. The house was already full when I arrived. I recognized faces from my mother's church neighbors from down the street, relatives I saw only at holidays, and several of my father's colleagues. Everyone dressed in their holiday best, holding crystal glasses of champagne, laughing and chatting in small clusters throughout the first floor. My mother spotted me immediately and rushed over, resplendent in a new red dress I'd definitely never seen before. "Grace, you look beautiful. Come in, come in. Everyone's been asking about you." She air-kissed both my cheeks, and I caught the scent of her expensive perfume, another recent purchase I suspected I'd funded. I held up the wrapped box. "Merry Christmas, Mom. I brought you something special." Her eyes lit up with that familiar, acquisitive gleam. "Oh, how thoughtful. I'll put it with the other gifts, and we'll open them later." She reached for the box, but I pulled it back gently. "Actually, I'd like you to open this one during your toast. I think everyone should see it." Something flickered across her face, uncertainty maybe, but it was quickly replaced by her practiced smile. "Of course, dear. Whatever you'd like." Claire appeared at my elbow wearing a new outfit and enough jewelry to stock a small boutique. "Grace, great timing. Mom's about to make her speech." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "She's been talking all week about how this is going to be the best Christmas ever. something about a family announcement. I felt a cold certainty settle in my stomach. My mother was planning some new manipulation or demand, but tonight she wouldn't get the chance. At precisely 8 o'clock, my mother clinked a knife against her champagne glass, and the room gradually fell silent. She stood near the fireplace, positioned perfectly beneath the twinkling lights, holding court like a queen addressing her subjects. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight," she began, her voice warm and gracious. "Christmas has always been my favorite time of year because it reminds us what truly matters. Not the presents or the decorations, but the love we share with the people closest to us. Family is everything. It's the foundation on which we build our lives, the source of our strength and joy." I watched faces around the room nodding in agreement, saw people glancing at each other with those soft, sentimental expressions people get during holiday speeches about family values. "My daughters have blessed me beyond measure," my mother continued, and now her voice took on a tearful quality that I recognized as completely manufactured. "Claire and Grace, you've both made me so proud, but Grace especially—" She turned to look at me directly, and I saw the calculation behind her misty eyes. "Grace has such a generous heart. She's always giving back to the family that raised her, always thinking of others before herself. She's the embodiment of what it means to be selfless." The room erupted in applause. People turned to smile at me, raising their glasses in my direction. My father stood in the corner, his face gray and miserable. Claire beamed beside me, clearly enjoying the attention and having no idea what was about to happen. I let the applause continue for a moment, watching my mother bask in the reflected glory of her supposedly generous daughter. Then, just as the noise began to die down, Linda Patterson stood up from her seat in the back corner of the room. "Excuse me," Linda said, her elderly voice carrying surprising strength across the crowded room. "Can I say something?" My mother's smile faltered slightly. "Linda, of course. Though I was just about to— I've known this family for many years." Linda interrupted, her pale blue eyes fierce and focused. "And I think it's time we talked about what family really means. Because not everyone in this room has been honest about that word. Not everyone here has lived up to those values you just spoke about so beautifully." The room went completely silent. People shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether this was part of the planned program or something else entirely. My mother's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. I took that moment to walk forward through the crowd, the silver-wrapped box held carefully in both hands. People parted to let me through their eyes, following my progress toward my mother. When I reached her, I held out the gift with a smile that I knew looked nothing like the compliant, grateful expression she was used to seeing on my face. "Here's my Christmas gift, Mom," I said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I think you'll find it very revealing." My mother took the box from my hands, her smile now uncertain around the edges. She clearly sensed that something was wrong, that the dynamics in the room had shifted in ways she couldn't control, but her pride and her need to maintain appearances wouldn't let her refuse the gift in front of all these witnesses. "Well, let's see what my thoughtful daughter has given me," she said, her voice straining for lightness. Her fingers fumbled slightly with the silver ribbon, and I noticed her hands weren't quite steady. She pulled off the wrapping paper, carefully revealed the plain white box underneath, and lifted the lid. For a moment, she just stared down at the contents, her brain clearly struggling to process what she was seeing. Then she pulled out the first document, a bank statement with bright yellow highlighting marking every unauthorized withdrawal. Her face went from confusion to comprehension to horror in the space of 3 seconds. "What is this?" she whispered, but her voice carried in the silent room. "Keep looking," I said calmly. "There's more." She pulled out another document, then another. The photocopied account contract with the different ink colors clearly marked. Screenshots of her Facebook comments blown up to 8 by 10 prints, her words about me saving money for family preserved in glossy color. Page after page of evidence, each one more damning than the last. Her hand shook as she reached the letter from Julia's law firm printed on official letterhead outlining potential criminal charges: fraud, forgery, financial elder abuse, theft by deception. The guests had gone completely silent watching this unfold with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car accident. I saw Mrs. Harrison from the church lean toward her husband and whisper something. I saw my Aunt Diane's mouth fall open in shock. I saw Claire take a step backward, her face draining of color as she began to understand what was happening. "Grace, I don't understand," my mother said, her voice taking on that wounded, confused tone she always used when caught. "Why would you bring these private matters to a party? We can discuss this later as a family." "No," I said, and the firmness in my voice surprised even me. "We're going to discuss this right now in front of everyone you invited here to witness your performance about family values and generous daughters." She tried to shove the documents back into the box, but I reached in and pulled out the small Bluetooth speaker from the bottom. The USB drive was already inserted, already cued to the recording I wanted everyone to hear. "There's one more gift," I said, holding up the speaker for the room to see. "I think everyone should hear this." "Grace, please," my mother said, and now there was real fear in her voice. She reached for the speaker, but I stepped back out of her range. I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room crystal clear through the high-quality speaker I'd specifically chosen for this moment. "She's so stupid. Grace is so unbelievably stupid. She'll never figure out what we did with the account. She just signs whatever I put in front of her and never asks questions." Claire's voice came next, younger and uncertain. "But what if she checks her statements? She won't. She's too busy working herself to death to pay attention. And even if she did notice, what would she do? Grace doesn't have the spine to fight back. She never has." I watched my mother's face as her own words played back to her. The room was so quiet I could hear someone's phone buzzing in their purse, could hear the sound of ice settling in someone's drink. Every eye was fixed on either the speaker or my mother's horrified face. The recording continued. "She's not even my real daughter. She owes me everything for taking her in when no one else wanted her. My mother left that house to Grace in her will, but I made sure Grace never found out about it. I had the old woman declared incompetent and sold the property myself. Grace got nothing, and she'll never know what she lost." Mrs. Harrison gasped audibly. Linda pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The pastor from my mother's church set down his champagne glass with a sharp click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. My mother lunged for the speaker, but I held it away from her, letting the recording play on. Her voice continued casual and cruel. "If Grace ever figures it out and tries to turn on me, I'll destroy her. I have ways of making her look unstable. Who's going to believe her over me? The ungrateful adopted daughter having some kind of breakdown, or the devoted mother who sacrificed everything to raise her—" "Turn it off!" my mother hissed, her composure completely shattered now. "Grace, turn it off right now." But I didn't. The recording played for another 30 seconds, my mother and Claire discussing specific withdrawals, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate me casually, planning how to extract my upcoming bonus. When it finally ended, the silence that followed was deafening. Claire had backed up against the wall, her face the color of old paper. My father was gone. I hadn't even seen him leave the room. The guests stood frozen in various poses of shock and discomfort, holding their drinks and appetizer plates, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. My mother stood in the center of the room, surrounded by scattered documents, the empty gift box at her feet, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly, though there was plenty of that. Not fear, though I saw that too. It was the look of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing in real time, whose mask had been ripped away in front of everyone she'd worked so hard to impress. Her hands began to shake violently, the bank statements fluttering in her grip like trapped birds. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The recording might have ended, but in the ringing silence that followed, I could feel her cruel words still echoing off the walls, settling into the consciousness of every person in that room. Pastor Williams set down his plate and took a step toward the door. Mrs. Harrison followed. One by one, I watched my mother's carefully curated audience begin to fragment, people edging toward exits, avoiding eye contact, suddenly remembering urgent reasons they needed to leave. And through it all, my mother just stood there shaking as everything she'd built with my money and my silence crumbled into dust around her feet. The exodus began slowly, then accelerated. Pastor Williams was the first to move decisively toward the door, murmuring something about an early morning service. Mrs. Harrison and her husband followed close behind, their holiday cheer evaporated into tight-lipped discomfort. Within minutes, the carefully orchestrated Christmas party had transformed into a scene of awkward departures, guests clutching their coats and purses, mumbling excuses about babysitters and early flights. My mother finally found her voice, but it came out shrill and desperate. "Wait! Please, everyone, wait! This is a misunderstanding. Those recordings are edited. Grace has been under so much stress lately, I think she's having some kind of breakdown. This is all fake, manipulated." But no one was listening. I watched neighbor after neighbor slip past her toward the front door, their eyes carefully averted. The people who had applauded her speech about family values just minutes ago now couldn't leave fast enough, as if her toxicity might be contagious. "You have to believe me," my mother called after them, her voice cracking. "I would never say those things. My daughter is confused, she's mentally unwell, she needs help." "Stop," I said quietly, but with enough force that several people who were halfway out the door paused to look back. "Just stop lying. Everyone heard your voice. They know the truth now." Linda Patterson made her way through the thinning crowd toward me, moving with deliberate purpose despite her age. She took both my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "I'll testify to whatever you need," she said, her voice low but clear. "Everything I know about Margaret, about the house, about what really happened, I should have spoken up years ago. I won't stay silent anymore." I squeezed her hands, feeling tears prick at my eyes for the first time that evening. "Thank you." She nodded, then looked past me to where my mother stood, trembling with rage and humiliation. "Margaret would be so proud of you," Linda said, just loud enough for my mother to hear. Then she gathered her coat and left, her head held high. Within 10 minutes, the house was empty except for family. The Christmas tree lights twinkled mockingly over a scene of complete devastation. Half-empty champagne glasses sat abandoned on every surface. Expensive catered food congealed on silver platters. The scattered documents from my gift box lay where my mother had dropped them, evidence of her crime spread across the Persian rug like accusatory confetti. Claire stood near the fireplace, her arms wrapped around herself, mascara running down her face. When the last guest finally left and the door clicked shut, she turned on me with sudden fury. "You just destroyed this family," she screamed, her voice raw. "How could you do this? How could you humiliate us in front of everyone we know?" I looked at her calmly, feeling nothing but a strange, cold clarity. "No, Claire. I didn't destroy this family. I just showed everyone what you already were, what you've always been. We're your family. We raised you. You stole from me, systematically, for years. You and Mom talked about me like I was a resource to be exploited, not a person to be loved." I picked up one of the bank statements from the floor and held it up. "This isn't what families do to each other." My mother had collapsed into one of the dining room chairs, her perfect hair disheveled, her expensive dress wrinkled. She looked up at me with eyes that were red but dry, and I realized she wasn't crying from sadness or remorse. She was crying from rage at being caught, from the humiliation of public exposure. "How could you humiliate me like this?" she said, her voice taking on that wounded, martyred tone I knew so well. "After everything I did for you, I took you in when you had no one. I gave you a home, a name, a family, and this is how you repay me, by destroying my reputation in front of my friends, my church, everyone who respects me." The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. Even now, even with the evidence of her crimes scattered at her feet, she was positioning herself as the victim. She couldn't help it, Manipulation was so deeply ingrained in her that she probably believed her own performance. "I'm done," I said simply. "I'm done pretending. I'm done being grateful for abuse. I'm done protecting your reputation while you destroy my life." I picked up my purse and the Bluetooth speaker, leaving the documents where they lay. "You'll be hearing from my attorney." "Grace, wait," Claire started, but I was already walking toward the door. "Don't contact me," I said without turning around. "Either of you. We have nothing left to say to each other." I drove home through empty streets, my hands steady on the wheel, feeling lighter than I had in years. When I got to my apartment, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat down at my laptop. I had one more thing to do tonight. I opened my email and composed a message to the church board, the group of elders who oversaw the various ministries and made decisions about church leadership. My mother had been director of the Family Values Ministry for 5 years, a position she'd leveraged for social status and moral authority. The irony of that title wasn't lost on me. I attached the bank statements, the legal analysis Julia had prepared, the transcripts of the recordings, and the documentation of the stolen inheritance. Then I wrote a brief note. "I thought you should know who you've trusted with your families. The evidence speaks for itself. Grace Chen." I hit send and closed my laptop. My phone had been buzzing intermittently throughout the drive home, but I'd ignored it. Now I picked it up and saw the notifications flooding in. Missed calls from my mother, from Claire, from numbers I didn't recognize. Text messages ranging from pleading to threatening to desperately confused. The count kept climbing: 70 missed calls, 80, 90. I watched it hit 110. Then I powered the phone completely off. I finished my tea, slowly savoring the quiet of my apartment, the absence of manipulation and lies and constant emotional taxation. For the first time in weeks, maybe in years, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to release. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and climbed into bed. As I pulled the covers up and closed my eyes, I realized something remarkable. I wasn't anxious about what tomorrow would bring. I wasn't rehearsing explanations or apologies. I wasn't worrying about anyone's feelings but my own. For the first time since I could remember, I fell asleep peacefully, and I didn't dream at all. I woke up the next morning to silence, and it took me a moment to remember why that felt so significant. My phone was still powered off, sitting on my nightstand like a deactivated bomb. I made coffee, ate breakfast, and didn't turn it on until nearly 10 o'clock, bracing myself for whatever awaited. The voicemail box was full. I deleted them all without listening. The text messages were a mix of fury, pleading, and confusion. I scrolled through them with detached interest, as if reading about someone else's life. Then I saw the email from my bank, time-stamped at 6:47 a.m. "Dear Ms. Chen, we have received documentation regarding potentially fraudulent activity on your joint account ending in 4892. Per federal banking regulations, this account has been frozen pending investigation. A representative will contact you within 48 hours to discuss next steps." I read it twice, feeling a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. Julia had filed the formal complaint with the bank on Monday, armed with the photographs of the modified contract and the forensic analysis showing the different ink. The bank had clearly taken it seriously, which meant my mother, who had been freely withdrawing from that account for 7 years, suddenly had no access to what she'd come to think of as her personal fund. My phone rang 20 minutes later, my mother's number flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. And again. On the 4th call, I answered. "Grace, thank God." Her voice was breathless, panicked. "Something's wrong with the bank account. They've frozen it. I can't access any money. There must be some mistake. You need to call them right away and fix this." "There's no mistake," I said calmly. "What? What are you talking about, Grace? I need that money. I have bills to pay. The mortgage is due. I need groceries." "That's not your money, Mom. It never was. It's my account that you've been stealing from, and the bank is investigating the forged documents you used to gain access." There was a long silence. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted to that pleading, desperate tone. Grace, please. I'm sorry about the party. I know you're angry, but this is going too far. I'm your mother. You can't just cut me off without any money. How am I supposed to live? The same way everyone else does. With money you earned yourself. I don't have any money. Everything is tied up in that account, in the house, in... She stopped abruptly, realizing she was admitting that she'd been depending entirely on stolen funds. That sounds like a you problem, I said, and ended the call. She called back 6 more times. I didn't answer. 2 days later, Julia called with news. You're not going to believe this, but it's already spreading. Someone recorded the Christmas party confrontation on their phone and posted it to Facebook. It's been shared over 1,000 times locally. I felt my stomach drop. I'd expected the story to spread through gossip, but I hadn't anticipated video evidence going viral in our community. There's more, Julia continued. Your sister Claire just lost her job. What? She works in HR at Patterson & Sons, right? Well, her employer saw the videos. Apparently, they decided they couldn't have an HR professional whose family was publicly involved in a financial abuse scandal. They let her go this morning, citing character concerns and inability to maintain professional standards. I should have felt triumph, or at least satisfaction. Instead, I felt nothing. Claire had made her choices. She'd participated willingly in stealing from me, had mocked me behind my back, had benefited from my exploitation for years. The consequences were hers to bear. How's she taking it? I asked. According to my source, not well. She tried to claim she was a victim too, that your mother forced her to participate, but the recordings don't really support that narrative. That afternoon, a letter arrived at my apartment. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter delivered by regular mail in my mother's distinctive slanted script. I made tea before opening it, settling into my reading chair by the window. The letter was 2 pages long, written on expensive stationery that she'd probably bought with my money. Dear Grace, it began. I'm sorry you're upset. I know the party didn't go the way any of us wanted, and I regret that things got so out of hand. You have to understand I've been under enormous stress lately. Your father has been distant, the bills keep piling up, and I've been doing my best to hold this family together with no support from anyone. I felt my jaw tighten as I continued reading. A mother deserves another chance. I made mistakes, but I was only trying to help the family. You've always been so successful, so financially stable, and I thought you wouldn't mind sharing with those who had less. I never meant to hurt you. Please, Grace, think about what you're doing. Think about our family's reputation in the community. We can work this out privately without lawyers and banks and public scandals. Just call me and we can talk this through like adults. The letter continued in this vein for another page. Deflection manipulation, appeals to family loyalty, and subtle threats about reputation damage. What it didn't contain was a single genuine apology. No admission of wrongdoing, no acknowledgement of the systematic theft, the forged documents, the decades of emotional abuse. Just excuses, justifications, and demands that I make this all go away to protect her social standing. I read the final line, I'm your mother, and you owe me at least the chance to make this right. Please drop whatever you're planning with that lawyer. This can still be fixed. I set the letter down on my lap and laughed. It started as a quiet chuckle, but built into something harder, colder. I laughed until my sides hurt, until tears ran down my face, until the absurdity of it all had wrung itself out of my system. She still didn't get it. After everything, the public exposure, the bank investigation, the legal documentation, the testimony waiting from Linda, my mother still thought this was about hurt feelings that could be smoothed over with empty words and appeals to familial obligation. She still thought she could manipulate me into compliance, that if she just found the right combination of guilt and pressure, I would fold like I always had before. I wiped my eyes and picked up my phone. Julia answered on the first ring. I just got a letter from my mother, I said. She wants me to drop everything and work this out privately. What are you going to do? I looked at the letter again, at my mother's careful handwriting, at the complete absence of genuine remorse or accountability. Absolutely nothing, I said. She still doesn't get it. This isn't about forgiveness. This isn't about giving her another chance or protecting the family reputation. This is about justice, and I'm going to see it through to the end. Julia and I spent the next week preparing for the formal legal action. She filed a civil lawsuit seeking recovery of the stolen funds, punitive damages, and legal fees. The complaint was meticulous, laying out 7 years of systematic theft with supporting documentation that left no room for interpretation. Every withdrawal, every forged signature, every manipulated contract was cataloged and cross-referenced. We were building an airtight case, and my mother had to know it. I'd stopped answering calls from my family entirely. My mother's voicemails had progressed from pleading to angry to threatening, a predictable cycle I'd witnessed countless times before. Claire had left a few messages too, mostly variations on, "Please talk to Mom," and "You're tearing this family apart." I deleted them all without listening past the first few seconds. So when my phone rang one evening from an unfamiliar number, I almost didn't answer. Something made me pick up, though, maybe curiosity. Maybe the lawyer's instinct Julia had started to instill in me to document everything. "Hello?" There was a long pause, then a voice I barely recognized. "Grace, it's Claire." But it wasn't the Claire I knew. This voice was small, broken, stripped of the casual cruelty and entitlement I'd come to expect from my sister. This voice was shaking. "I'm calling from my friend Amber's phone," she continued quickly, as if afraid I'd hang up. "I know you're not taking my calls. I know you probably never want to hear from me again. But Grace, I need to tell you something. Please, just give me 5 minutes." I should have hung up. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to end the call, to maintain the boundary I'd set, to not give her an opening to manipulate me the way our mother had taught her. But something in her voice stopped me, a quality of genuine desperation I'd never heard from her before. "You have 5 minutes," I said. I heard her take a shuddering breath. "Mom made me do things. I know that sounds like an excuse, and maybe it is. But Grace, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. Sorry for what specifically?" I kept my voice hard, unwilling to make this easy for her. "For the $50,000, for suggesting it in the first place." Her voice cracked, and I heard unmistakable tears. "It was my idea. Mom had been talking for months about how you had so much money and we had so little. She kept saying you wouldn't miss it, that you didn't have a family to support, that you owed us for raising you." I was drowning, Grace. I had $20,000 in credit card debt from trying to keep up with everyone trying to look successful when I was barely making rent. I listened, saying nothing, letting her fill the silence. "I thought you'd never notice. Or if you did, you'd just be quietly disappointed and eventually forgive us like you always did. I thought—" She broke off, crying harder. "I thought you were weak. That's what Mom always said. That you were too weak to ever fight back, too desperate for approval to ever stand up for yourself. I believed her, and I'm so ashamed of that now." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "What do you want from me, Claire?" "Nothing. I don't want anything. I just needed you to know the truth. That I was the one who pushed for that $50,000. Mom would have kept taking smaller amounts like she had been, but I'm the one who said we should take a big chunk while you were distracted with work. I thought you wouldn't miss it." She laughed bitterly through her tears. "God, I was so stupid, so cruel. And I was wrong about everything, especially about you being weak." I sat down on my couch phone, pressed to my ear, trying to process this version of my sister I'd never encountered before. "The video cost you your job." I deserved it. I deserved that, and worse. "Grace, I have things that could help you. Evidence. I recorded some conversations with Mom over the past few months, just voice memos on my phone that I kept meaning to delete but never did. Her talking about how to manipulate you into giving us your bonus money, planning what to say, practicing her victim routine. I have passwords to her hidden email account where she talks to Aunt Diane about you. I have bank statements showing where some of the money went. Luxury purchases, trips, things she told you were necessities but weren't. I felt my heart rate pick up. Why would you give me that? Because I want to make it right. Or at least as right as I can make it now. I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't blame you. But I can't live with myself if I don't at least try to help fix what I helped break. The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, but I'd been manipulated too many times to trust easily. How do I know this isn't another setup? Some plan you and Mom cooked up to get me to drop the lawsuit. You don't, Claire said simply. You have no reason to trust me. But Grace, I'm sending you the files anyway, to your email, right now while we're on the phone. You can use them or not believe me or not. I just need you to know that I'm done lying. I'm done being Mom's accomplice. I'm done being the person who helped hurt you. I heard the notification ping on my laptop. I opened my email and saw a message from Claire's personal account with multiple attachments. Audio files, screenshots, scanned documents. Why now? I asked. What changed? There was a long silence. When Claire spoke again, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Because I just found out Mom did the same thing to me that she did to you. I went to her house yesterday to try to talk to her to convince her to settle with you before this got worse. I found her will on her desk. Grace, I'm not in it. Not a single mention. Everything goes to Dad, and if he's gone, it all goes to charity. She wrote it 3 years ago, and she never told me. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and pity. She was using both of us. Yeah. Claire's voice broke completely. She was. And I was so busy helping her use you that I never saw she was doing the same to me. We were both just resources to her, tools. And when we stopped being useful, we were disposable. She took a shaky breath. I'm so sorry, Grace. For all of it. For being blind, for being cruel, for not seeing that you were the only real family I had and I destroyed it. I looked at the files she'd sent at the evidence that could strengthen my case even further and felt the weight of a decision I hadn't expected to face. Why are you really helping me now, Claire? I asked quietly. Her answer came immediately raw and honest. Because I just found out Mom did the same thing to me that she did to you. I'm not in her will at all. She was using both of us and I was too stupid to see it until it was too late. After I hung up with Claire, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, not bothering to turn on the lights. Her files were open on my laptop, damning evidence that would make Julia's case even stronger. But I couldn't bring myself to look through them yet. Instead, I found myself thinking about that science trophy, the one that had started everything, or at least the one that had shown me what everything was. The memory came back in sharper detail, now pieces I'd suppressed or forgotten filling in around the edges. I was 14, standing in our garage with that first-place trophy in my hands, and my mother had pulled me aside before we even went into the house, not in the kitchen like I'd remembered, earlier than that. Grace, we need to talk, she'd said, her voice low and serious. We stood by her car in the driveway while Claire and my father went inside. You're going to give that trophy to your sister. But Mom, I won it fair and square. You're adopted, remember? The words came out sharp-cutting. You're not actually my daughter. Your real mother died and left you with nothing. We took you in when no one else wanted you. We gave you a home, a family, a name. The least you can do is help your real sister feel special. Or do you want to be ungrateful? I remembered the way my chest had constricted, the way the trophy had suddenly felt heavy in my hands. I'd been 14 years old, and in that moment I'd learned that love in this family was conditional. That I owed a debt I could never fully repay. That my worth was measured in how much I was willing to sacrifice. I'd given Claire the trophy without another word of protest. The memory sat heavy in my chest, and I found myself moving almost on autopilot to my bedroom closet. I pulled down boxes I hadn't opened in years, sorting through old yearbooks and school papers, until I found what I was looking for. A cloth-bound diary with 2009 embossed on the cover in faded gold letters. I sat on my bedroom floor and opened it, flipping through pages of teenage angst and mundane observations about homework and crushes. Then I found the entry dated 2 weeks after the science fair, written in my careful 14-year-old handwriting. Mom said again today that I owe them everything for taking me in. She said it in front of Claire and Dad at dinner like it was a joke, but I could tell she meant it. Everyone laughed except Dad. He just looked at his plate. I don't remember being adopted. I don't remember anyone telling me about it before last month. Am I supposed to feel grateful forever? Am I supposed to spend my whole life proving I deserve to be here? Sometimes I feel like I'm not really part of this family, like I'm performing a role, and if I mess up my lines, they'll send me back. But there's nowhere to send me back to. One day, I'll stop giving them everything. One day I'll be free. I have to believe that, or I don't know how to keep going. I read those words twice, then a third time, feeling tears slip down my face. That 14-year-old girl had known. She'd seen the pattern, felt the trap closing around her, and made herself a promise. One day she would stop giving. One day she would be free. It had taken 16 years, but I was finally keeping that promise. I thought about all the moments in between, all the times I'd swallowed my anger and hurt, all the sacrifices I'd made while telling myself it was what good daughters did. Yale. The trust fund I'd never known existed. The house on Maple Street. 7 years of stolen money. Each one a stone in the wall they'd built around me, brick by brick, until I couldn't remember what freedom looked like. But that girl had remembered. She'd written it down. Left herself a message across time: this isn't normal. This isn't love. One day you'll be strong enough to stop. I closed the diary carefully and held it against my chest. I wasn't betraying my family by fighting back. I was honoring a promise I'd made to myself when I was too young to act on it, but old enough to know something was deeply wrong. That 14-year-old girl had been waiting 16 years for me to find my courage, and I'd finally found it. The realization brought a strange sense of peace. This wasn't a breakdown or a betrayal or an overreaction like my mother would try to claim. This was the inevitable conclusion to a story that had been written long ago. I'd just been too close to see the ending coming. I was putting the diary back in its box when my phone rang. Julia's name flashed on the screen, and something about the timing made my stomach tighten. It was nearly 9 o'clock, well past her usual business hours. Julia. Grace, I need you to listen carefully. Her voice was tight, professional, but with an undercurrent of urgency that made my pulse quicken. Your mother just filed something with the court. I got the notification 10 minutes ago. I felt the peace I'd found moments ago evaporate. Filed what? A motion claiming you're mentally incompetent and requesting emergency guardianship over your financial affairs. She's arguing that your recent behavior, the public confrontation, the allegations against her, the bank complaints demonstrate that you're having a psychological breakdown and are a danger to yourself. She's petitioned the court to grant her temporary control of your assets until you can undergo psychiatric evaluation. The words hit me like ice water. My mother was trying to do to me exactly what she'd done to my grandmother. Use the legal system to declare me incompetent, take control of my money, and silence me before I could expose her completely. Can she do that? My voice came out steadier than I felt. She can try. And Grace, we need to take this very seriously. She's playing dirty now. We need to meet first thing tomorrow morning and prepare a response. If the judge grants even a temporary order, she could freeze your accounts, access your finances, potentially even have you committed for evaluation. I looked down at the diary in my lap at that 14-year-old's promise to herself. My mother had spent 3 decades teaching me to be compliant, to be weak, to believe I owed her everything. Now she was betting that training would hold, that the legal system would see me as an unstable, ungrateful daughter attacking her devoted mother. She'd miscalculated. I'll be at your office at 8, I said. And Julia, bring everything. Every recording, every document, every piece of evidence we have. If my mother wants to go to war, let's show her what she's up against. Julia and I spent the morning preparing our response to my mother's guardianship petition. We assembled medical records showing I had no history of mental illness, statements from my employer praising my stability and performance, and bank records proving I'd been managing my finances responsibly for years. The petition was transparently vindictive, but we couldn't take any chances. Julia filed our opposition by noon, and we both felt cautiously confident the judge would see through my mother's manipulation. That afternoon, I received a call from my Aunt Diane, my mother's older sister. Her voice was warm but formal, the tone of someone delivering a rehearsed speech. "Grace, honey, I know things have been difficult lately. The family thinks it would be good for everyone to sit down together and talk this through. No lawyers, no courts, just family. We want to help you and your mother find a path forward." She paused. "Can you come to my house tomorrow evening just to talk? We all love you and we want to help heal this rift." Every instinct told me this was a trap, but Julia had different advice when I called her. "Go," she said. "But I'm coming with you. If they're planning an ambush, we'll be ready for it, and Grace record everything." The next evening, I arrived at Aunt Diane's house in the suburbs with Julia beside me and my phone recording in my jacket pocket. The living room was full when we walked in, Aunt Diane and Uncle Robert, my mother's brother Thomas, and his wife. And of course, my mother sitting in the center of the couch, looking pale and tragic in a simple black dress that screamed wounded victim. Her eyes widened when she saw Julia. "What is she doing here? This is supposed to be a family meeting." "Julia is my attorney," I said calmly. "If we're going to discuss legal matters, she needs to be present." Aunt Diane exchanged a glance with my mother, but she gestured for us to sit. "Of course. We just want everyone to feel comfortable." The intervention began exactly as I'd expected. My aunts and uncles took turns expressing their concern, their disappointment, their hope that we could work this out as a family. Uncle Thomas spoke about the importance of forgiveness. Aunt Diane talked about not airing private matters in public. My mother's sister-in-law mentioned how much this was hurting my father, who apparently hadn't left the house in days. Through it all, my mother sat dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of maternal suffering. When it was her turn to speak, her voice trembled with practiced emotion. "I never meant to hurt you, Grace. I was under so much stress trying to hold this family together, and yes, I made some mistakes with the money, but I truly believed you wanted to help us. You'd always been so generous before." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry if I misunderstood. I'm sorry if I took advantage of your kindness. Can't we just put this behind us and move forward as a family?" It was a masterful performance. I could see my aunts and uncles nodding sympathetically, their expressions softening toward my mother. This was what they'd come to see, a repentant mother asking for forgiveness from her unstable daughter. Aunt Diane leaned forward. "Grace, your mother has apologized. Surely you can see how much pain this is causing everyone. The lawsuit, the public accusations, that terrible scene at Christmas, it's destroying our family's reputation. People at church are talking. Your mother had to step down from her ministry position. Can't you just drop the legal case and let this family heal?" I let the silence stretch for a long moment, watching their expectant faces. Then I smiled. "I'll drop everything," I said. My mother's face lit up with relief. Aunt Diane clasped her hands together. "Oh, Grace, that's wonderful." "On one condition," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "Mom needs to confess the full truth in front of everyone here. Not the sanitized version she just gave us. The real truth. Admit that you stole nearly $200,000 from my account over 7 years. Admit that you hid my Yale acceptance letters and faked an illness to keep me from going to college. Admit that you had Grandmother Margaret declared incompetent so you could steal the house she left me in her will. Admit that you forged documents to access my bank account. Admit all of it here now in front of your family." The room went completely silent. My mother's face had drained of color. "I won't," she started. "You won't what?" "Tell the truth." I kept my voice calm, almost conversational. "These are your siblings, Mom. Your family. If you're really sorry, if you really want to heal this rift, then be honest with them. Let them hear what you actually did, not the story you've been telling yourself. Grace, that's not fair, Aunt Diane interjected. You're asking her to humiliate herself. I'm asking her to tell the truth. There's a difference. My mother stood up abruptly, her mask of contrition cracking. I won't be humiliated like this, not in front of my own family. Grace, you're being cruel and vindictive. This whole meeting was supposed to be about reconciliation, not this interrogation. Then we have nothing to discuss, I said, standing as well. Julia rose beside me, her expression neutral and professional. Grace, please. Uncle Thomas tried. Can't you see you're being unreasonable? Your mother said she was sorry. What more do you want? I want the truth, but clearly that's too much to ask. I picked up my purse, nodded to Julia, and turned toward the door. Wait, my mother said, her voice sharp now, all pretense of tears gone. If you walk out that door, you're choosing to destroy this family. Everything that happens from here is on you. I turned back to face her, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in her eyes. She knew she was losing control of the narrative, losing control of me. I'm not destroying this family, Mom. I'm just refusing to keep your secrets anymore. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up so everyone could see the recording app, the timer showing it had been running for 43 minutes. Everything that was said here tonight is documented. Every deflection, every manipulation, every refusal to take accountability. My mother's face went white. You recorded us without permission. Washington is a one-party consent state, Julia said calmly. Grace had every legal right to record this conversation. I pulled up my email on my phone, showing them the draft I'd prepared before we arrived. The recipient was already filled in the local news reporter who'd been leaving messages about the church embezzlement story, the one who'd already received tips about my mother's activities. I'm giving you one last chance, I said. Tell the truth right now, or this recording goes to the press. You have 10 seconds to decide. My mother stared at me, and I watched her calculating, trying to find an angle, a way to manipulate the situation back under her control. But there wasn't one. I'd learned from the best after all. 10, I said. Grace, you wouldn't. 9, 8. Aunt Diane stood up. This is blackmail. 7, 6, 5. Stop counting, my mother shrieked. You ungrateful, spiteful, 4, 3. I won't do it. I won't let you humiliate me. 2, 1. I hit send. My mother lunged toward me, but Julia stepped between us. The room erupted in chaos, everyone talking at once, but I just stood there calmly watching my mother's world crumble in real time. You taught me well, Mom, I said quietly, and walked out the door. The recording from the intervention went viral within 48 hours. The reporter I'd sent it to ran a story titled, Local Family Torn Apart by Financial Abuse Allegations. And suddenly my private battle became public knowledge. My phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from other reporters, curious acquaintances, and people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly eager to offer support or gossip. Julia called me 3 days after the intervention with unexpected news. Grace, I need to tell you something. Your mother hired a private investigator to dig into your background. I felt my stomach tighten. What did they find? Nothing. I could hear the smile in Julia's voice. Absolutely nothing. No criminal record, no history of mental illness, no substance abuse, no questionable financial transactions. Your credit score is excellent. Your employer gave a glowing reference when the investigator called them under false pretenses. Your neighbors said you're quiet and responsible. There's literally nothing to discredit you with. So why are you telling me? Because the investigator filed his report with your mother yesterday, and my source says she had a complete meltdown when she read it. He told her that not only is there nothing damaging in your background, but you've been building a meticulous legal case against her for months. Bank statements, recordings, witness statements, forensic analysis of forged documents, everything organized and cross-referenced. The investigator's exact words were, "Your daughter has been 3 steps ahead of you this entire time." I sat down on my couch processing this. My mother had been so certain she could find something to use against me, some weakness to exploit or scandal to expose. Instead, she'd paid someone to confirm that I was exactly what I appeared to be, a stable, responsible adult, with airtight documentation of her crimes. "What does this mean for us?" I asked. "It means she's desperate and cornered, which makes her dangerous. But it also means we're ready." Julia's voice turned businesslike. "I'm filing the formal lawsuit today. I wanted to give you a heads up because once this becomes public record, things are going to move fast." She wasn't wrong. Julia filed the civil complaint that afternoon, and by evening it was a matter of public record. The lawsuit named my mother as defendant and outlined 3 main claims: fraud for the systematic theft from my bank account, financial elder abuse for the manipulation of my grandmother Margaret's estate, and theft by deception for the forged documents. The amount we were seeking was specific and brutal: $200,000 in stolen funds, $50,000 in punitive damages, and full reimbursement of legal fees. The local news picked it up immediately. "Local church volunteer accused of stealing from adopted daughter," ran as the headline on the evening news. By the next morning, it had spread to regional outlets, and my mother's carefully cultivated reputation was disintegrating in real time. A reporter from the Seattle Times reached out asking if I'd be willing to give an interview. Julia advised me to do it, but to be strategic. "Don't be emotional. Don't attack her character. Just present the facts calmly and let the evidence speak for itself." I met the journalist, a woman named Patricia Chen, at a coffee shop downtown. She was professional and direct, asking pointed questions about the timeline of events, the evidence I'd gathered, and my motivations for going public. I answered each question carefully, showing her copies of bank statements, the forensic analysis of the altered contract, and transcripts of the recordings where my mother discussed destroying me if I fought back. "This must be incredibly painful for you," Patricia said, her pen poised over her notebook. "Going to war with your own mother." "It is painful," I agreed. But what was more painful was spending 30 years believing I owed her my life for the privilege of being raised by someone who never loved me. At some point, you have to choose your own well-being over someone else's reputation, even if that someone is family. The interview ran 2 days later, and it was everything Julia had hoped for. Patricia had written a balanced piece that let the facts tell the story, quoting extensively from court documents and including my measured, rational responses. The accompanying photo showed me in professional attire, calm and composed, holding a folder of documentation. In contrast, my mother had been caught by news cameras leaving the courthouse after a preliminary hearing, and the footage was devastating for her. She was screaming at the reporters, her face contorted with rage, makeup running from tears she couldn't control. "My daughter is lying. She's mentally unstable. This is elder abuse." The contrast between my composure and her hysteria was stark and damning. Public opinion shifted rapidly. The comment sections filled with people sharing their own stories of financial abuse by family members, of being made to feel guilty for setting boundaries, of finally standing up to toxic parents. I received dozens of messages from strangers thanking me for speaking out, for showing that it was possible to fight back. My mother's church formally asked her to step down from all volunteer positions, pending the outcome of the legal case. Her friends stopped calling. Even her own siblings had gone silent after the intervention recording made its rounds. Then, on a Friday afternoon, my phone rang with a call from an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another reporter, but something made me pick up. "Ms. Chen." "This is Rebecca Tran. I'm a clerk with King County Superior Court." "Yes." "I'm calling to inform you that Judge Morrison has requested a meeting in chambers tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with both parties present. This is regarding case number CV 2025-8847 Chen v. Chen." "Okay," I said slowly. "Is that unusual?" There was a pause. Ms. Chen, the judge, has also requested that we pull all available records related to your grandmother Margaret Chen's estate, including the guardianship petition from 2005 and the subsequent property transfers. He specifically mentioned reviewing the circumstances under which she was declared incompetent. Another pause. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I think you should know this case is bigger than simple financial fraud now. The judge is looking into whether there was systematic abuse of the guardianship system and potential criminal violations related to elder exploitation. My hand tightened on the phone. What does that mean? It means your mother could be facing criminal charges, not just a civil judgment. You should make sure your attorney is prepared for that possibility. Her voice softened slightly. And Ms. Chen, I've been working in family court for 15 years. I've seen a lot of these cases. What you're doing takes real courage. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I thanked her and ended the call, then immediately phoned Julia. As I explained what the clerk had told me, I felt a strange mix of vindication and dread settling in my chest. I'd wanted justice, wanted my mother held accountable, but the reality of potential criminal charges made everything suddenly very real and very final. This is good, Grace, Julia said firmly. This means the system is working. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow we show the judge exactly what your mother did, and we let him decide what justice looks like. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my apartment, thinking about my grandmother Margaret, about the house on Maple Street, that should have been mine, about all the ways my mother had manipulated the very systems meant to protect vulnerable people. Tomorrow, finally, someone with real authority would see the full picture, and my mother would have to face the consequences of 3 decades of lies. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined, more intimate. Judge Morrison sat behind his bench, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. My mother sat at the defendant's table with her attorney, a man she'd hired with money from somewhere I didn't want to know about. She wore a conservative navy suit and had her hair pulled back severely, playing the role of dignified victim even here. Julia and I sat across the aisle, our evidence organized in neat folders. But the testimony would tell the real story, and Julia had prepared our witnesses carefully. Claire was called first. I watched my sister walk to the witness stand, her hands shaking as she was sworn in. She looked thin, older than her 28 years, wearing a simple gray dress that made her look small and tired. When she sat down, she wouldn't look at our mother. Julia began gently. Ms. Chen, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? She's my mother, Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. The judge leaned forward slightly. Please speak up for the record. Claire cleared her throat. Margaret Chen is my mother. Grace is my sister, though I only recently learned she was adopted. Over the next 40 minutes, Claire laid out everything. She provided the text messages where our mother had pressured her about my money. The emails discussing how to manipulate me into sharing my earnings. The recordings Claire had made on her phone where our mother practiced what to say to make me feel guilty. Each piece of evidence was entered into the record, and with each one I watched our mother's attorney lean over to whisper urgently in her ear. Ms. Chen, Julia said, can you tell the court about the $50,000 withdrawn in November? Claire's voice broke. That was my idea. I suggested it to my mother. I was in debt and desperate, and she'd been telling me for months how Grace had so much, and we had so little. I convinced myself Grace wouldn't miss it, that she owed us somehow. I was wrong about everything. She finally looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry, Grace. I take full responsibility for my part in this. The judge's expression remained neutral, but I saw him making notes. Do you expect us to believe your mother had no role in planning this theft? No, Your Honor. She planned it. I just gave her the excuse she needed to take more at once instead of the smaller amounts she'd been taking for years. When it was the defense attorney's turn to cross-examine, he tried to paint Claire as unstable as someone trying to shift blame to avoid her own consequences. But Claire held firm, answering every question with painful honesty, never deflecting, never minimizing her own guilt, while also never backing down from the truth about our mother's systematic exploitation. Then my father was called. I'd barely seen him in the week since the Christmas party, and the man who took the stand looked like he'd aged a decade. His suit hung loose on his frame, and his hands trembled as he was sworn in. Julia's questions were straightforward, but the answers were devastating. My father corroborated the affair he'd had when I was 10, the blackmail that had followed the 30 years of silence while he watched his wife manipulate and exploit both daughters. When Julia asked why he'd never intervened, his voice cracked. Because I was a coward. Because she threatened to take my daughters from me, to destroy my reputation, to leave me with nothing. I chose my own comfort over Grace's well-being, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. He looked directly at me for the first time. I gave Grace the recordings because it was the only brave thing I could think to do, but it should have been so much more. I should have protected her. I failed her every single day. His testimony about my grandmother's estate was equally damning. He confirmed that Margaret had wanted the house to go to me, that my mother had manipulated the guardianship process, that he'd watched it happen, and said nothing because he was too afraid of what his wife would do if he spoke up. By the time both testimonies were complete, the courtroom felt heavy with truth. My mother's attorney had managed to chip away at some minor details, but the core narrative stood solid and unshakable. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess, then returned with his ruling. He spoke for nearly 10 minutes, outlining the evidence, the credibility of witnesses, and the applicable laws. Then he delivered his judgment. I find in favor of the plaintiff Grace Chen on all counts. The defendant, Margaret Chen, is ordered to repay the initial sum of $50,000 plus accrued interest totaling $53,200. Additionally, she is ordered to pay $25,000 in punitive damages for deliberate financial abuse and to reimburse all legal fees incurred by the plaintiff, estimated at $22,000. Total judgment, $100,200. He paused, looking directly at my mother. Furthermore, I am referring the matter of Margaret Chen Sr.'s guardianship and estate to the Criminal Division for investigation of potential elder abuse and fraud. All of the defendant's assets are frozen pending the outcome of that investigation. My mother's face went pale. Her attorney immediately began arguing for a stay of the asset freeze, but the judge cut him off. The evidence suggests systematic exploitation of a vulnerable elderly woman and abuse of the guardianship system. The freeze stands. We're adjourned. As people began gathering their belongings, my mother stood and turned to face me across the courtroom. Her mask of composure had finally shattered completely. She pushed past her attorney and came close enough that only I could hear her hiss. This isn't over. You'll never see that money. I'll make sure of it. Julia stepped between us. That sounds like a threat, Mrs. Chen. Would you like to repeat that for the court reporter? My mother turned and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I should have felt triumph. I'd won. The judge had validated everything. My mother's crimes were now part of the public record, and justice had been served. But all I felt was exhausted and strangely empty, like I'd been fighting for so long that I'd forgotten what peace felt like. 1 week later, my phone rang early in the morning. My father's name appeared on the screen, and something about the timing made my heart race. Grace? His voice was thin, frightened. Your mother is gone. She disappeared sometime in the night. All her clothes are gone, her car is gone, and she left a note saying she won't let you destroy her. I don't know where she went. I sat up in bed, fully awake now. Did you call the police? Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. Grace, I think she's running. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of this new development settle over me. Of course she was running. My mother had spent her entire life manipulating situations to her advantage, and when that failed, she simply changed the game entirely. Call the police, Dad. Report her missing. Let them know about the court order and the asset freeze. She's a flight risk now. After I hung up, I stared at my phone for a long time, wondering where my mother had gone and what she was planning. The judge had ruled in my favor, but my mother's final words echoed in my mind. "You'll never see that money." She'd been right about one thing: this wasn't over. My mother had vanished, but Julia's investigation into her whereabouts uncovered something I hadn't expected. She called me 3 days after my father reported the disappearance, her voice tense in a way I'd rarely heard. "Grace, I need you to come to my office. I found something while tracing your mother's financial connections, but it's not about her. It's about your father." I arrived within the hour, my mind racing through possibilities. Julia had spreadsheets open on her computer, bank records highlighted in yellow and pink. I was looking for hidden accounts your mother might have access to, following money trails to see if she'd been stashing cash somewhere we didn't know about, Julia explained. "But I found something else. Your father has been making regular payments to an address in Spokane, $2,000 a month like clockwork for the past 12 years. I stared at the screen, watching my comfortable assumptions about my father begin to crack. Spokane. We don't know anyone in Spokane. That's what I thought too, so I hired a private investigator. She slid a folder across her desk, and I could tell from her expression that whatever was inside would hurt. "Grace, your father has another family." The words didn't make sense at first. I opened the folder and saw surveillance photos, my father standing outside a modest house with a woman I'd never seen before, his arm around her waist. Another photo showed him pushing a young girl on a swing while a boy kicked a soccer ball nearby. He was smiling in these photos, relaxed in a way I'd never seen him at our house. "Her name is Patricia Hendricks," Julia said quietly. "She's 42, works as a dental hygienist. The children are named Emma and Lucas, ages 12 and 10. According to public records, your father is listed as the father on both birth certificates, though he used his middle name James instead of Thomas." I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. 12 years. He's had another family for 12 years. The investigator spoke to neighbors, got some background. Patricia believes she's his only family. He told her his wife died in a car accident years ago, that he travels for work, which is why he's only there on weekends and some holidays. She has no idea you exist. The betrayal hit me in waves. My father, who I'd almost begun to forgive after his courtroom testimony, who I'd pitied for his weakness and cowardice, had been living an entire secret life. While I was struggling to make sense of my adoptive family, he'd been building a replacement family 300 miles away. "I need to talk to her," I said. Julia nodded slowly. "I thought you might. The investigator can give you the address." 2 days later, I stood on Patricia Hendricks' front porch in a quiet Spokane suburb, my heart pounding as I rang the doorbell. The woman who answered had kind eyes and brown hair pulled back in a ponytail. She smiled politely, assuming I was selling something or conducting a survey. "Patricia Hendricks?" I asked. "Yes. My name is Grace Chen. I'm Thomas Chen's daughter." The smile vanished. She gripped the doorframe, her face going pale. "That's not possible. Thomas doesn't have children. His wife died before they could—" She stopped, understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. "His wife didn't die. She just disappeared a week ago after a judge ordered her to repay me $100,000 she stole from my bank account. And Thomas is my father, though I'm only now realizing how little that word actually means." Patricia invited me in with shaking hands. Her living room was warm and comfortable, filled with photos of the children, of her and my father at various celebrations. We sat across from each other, and I watched her world crumble as I explained the truth. My father's first family, the court case, the decades of lies. "He told me he was a consultant, that he had to travel for work," she said, her voice hollow. "He's here most weekends. Holidays, summer vacations. The children adore him. He coaches Lucas's soccer team." She pressed her hands to her face. "Oh God, those poor kids. How do I tell them their father has been lying to them their entire lives?" "There's more," I said gently. "The investigator found that my father has been sending you $2,000 a month. Can I ask where he told you that money came from?" "His inheritance. He said his parents left him a trust fund that paid out monthly. He said when he died there would be a larger fund for the children, about $500,000. She looked up at me, already knowing what I was going to say. There's no trust fund, is there? No. And I don't think my grandparents left him anything substantial. I think that money came from somewhere else. I pulled out the bank statements Julia had prepared showing the withdrawals from my account that matched the timeline of payments to Patricia. I think it came from me. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Grace, I had no idea. I swear I didn't know any of this. If I'd known he was married, if I'd known he had a daughter, if I'd known the money was stolen. I know. I said and I meant it. Looking at her stricken face, I could see she was as much a victim of my father's lies as I was. He lied to both of us. She stood abruptly and went to a bookshelf, pulling down a photo album. She flipped through it until she found what she was looking for, then handed me a picture. It showed my father with Emma and Lucas in front of a Christmas tree, all three of them wearing matching pajamas and grinning at the camera. Patricia's voice was thick with tears as she spoke. Turn it over. I flipped the photo and saw my father's handwriting on the back, dated last December. My real family, Christmas 2024. The words hit harder than I expected. My real family. Not his first family, not his legal family, but his real one. The one he'd chosen, the one he smiled with, the one he'd stolen from me to support. I handed the photo back to Patricia, feeling a strange kinship with this woman I'd never met before today. We were both women who'd believed in a man who didn't exist, who'd built our lives around someone who'd been performing a role while his real self lived elsewhere. What are you going to do? Patricia asked. I don't know yet. What about you? She looked at the photo in her hands, at the evidence of a happiness built on lies. I need to tell the children something. I need to figure out how to survive without that monthly money he's been sending. And I need to decide if I ever want to see Thomas Chen again. We sat together in her living room as the afternoon light faded, two women who'd loved the same liar in different ways, both of us trying to understand how we'd been so thoroughly deceived. My father wasn't the weak but fundamentally decent man I'd almost convinced myself he was. He was just another person who'd used me, who'd taken what he needed and given me nothing but lies in return. As I drove back to Seattle that evening, I realized that my entire family had been a performance. My mother had played the devoted parent while stealing my future. My sister had played the loving sibling while helping rob me blind. And my father had played the trapped victim while building a whole new life with money he'd taken from mine. I'd won in court, but I was beginning to understand that I'd lost something bigger, any illusion that the people who raised me had ever really been my family at all. I spent 3 days processing what I'd learned about my father before Linda called. Her voice on the phone was different than I'd heard before, trembling with an urgency that made me agree to meet her immediately, despite my exhaustion with family revelations. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where no one would recognize us. Linda was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she clearly hadn't touched. She looked older than her 50 years, the weight of whatever she was carrying aging her before my eyes. Thank you for coming, she said, as I slid into the booth across from her. I know you've been through so much and I'm about to add to it. But Grace, I can't keep this secret anymore. I should have told you years ago. She reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph, its edges worn soft from handling. She placed it on the table between us, and I found myself looking at an image from another lifetime. A woman I recognized as my grandmother Margaret sat in a hospital bed, younger and healthier than I remembered her, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a pink blanket. Standing beside the bed was a girl who couldn't have been more than 20, her face a mixture of joy and heartbreak. It took me a moment to recognize her as a young Linda. That baby is you, Linda said quietly. And that girl standing next to Margaret is me 30 years ago. I stared at the photograph, my mind racing to connect pieces I hadn't known were missing. I don't understand. Linda took a shaky breath. Margaret wasn't just my best friend Grace. She was my mother. I'm not a family friend who happened to be close to your grandmother. I'm her daughter, her younger daughter, which makes me your biological mother's sister." She paused, watching my face. "No, that's not quite right either. Grace, I'm your biological mother." The cafe noise faded into background static. I heard her words, but they seemed to be coming from very far away. "What?" "I got pregnant when I was 20 years old. The father was someone I'd dated briefly who wanted nothing to do with a baby. I was young, scared, working minimum wage jobs, and living in a studio apartment I could barely afford. Margaret saw how I was struggling, and she came up with a plan." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "Her older daughter, your adoptive mother, had been married for 3 years and couldn't have children. Margaret suggested that she adopt you, raise you as her own. That way you'd stay in the family, you'd have stability, a good home, and I could still be in your life just as Aunt Linda instead of Mom." I felt like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else. "You gave me to her. You gave me to that woman." "I thought she would love you," Linda said, her voice breaking. "She was my sister, Margaret's daughter. I thought she'd treasure you the way I couldn't provide for you. I was so young, Grace, and so naive. I didn't see what Margaret saw." What did Margaret see? That her older daughter was cruel. That she was selfish and manipulative and incapable of the kind of love a child needs. Margaret tried to warn me, but I didn't listen. I was desperate to believe my sister would do right by you. Linda wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. "By the time I realized what your life with her was really like, years had passed. You were 10 and you called her Mom. How could I tell you then? What right did I have to disrupt your world after I'd already given you away?" I thought about all those Sunday dinners, all those family gatherings where Linda had watched from the sidelines, had slipped me those knowing looks, had finally sent that anonymous email when she could no longer stay silent. You knew what she was doing to me. Not everything, not at first, but over the years I saw things. The way she spoke to you differently than Claire. The way she made you feel like you owed her something for existing. And then Margaret got sick, and I watched your mother manipulate the guardianship system, steal the house that was supposed to be yours. Linda's hands clenched into fists. That's when I knew I had to do something, even if it was 25 years too late. The emails. The warning about Maple Street. That was you trying to make up for giving me to her in the first place. Yes, and it was cowardly and inadequate, but I didn't know what else to do. Until the Christmas party, until you finally fought back, I thought maybe I'd stay silent forever and just live with the guilt. She reached across the table, but I pulled my hands back. Grace, before Margaret died, she knew what her older daughter really was. She tried to protect you the only way she could. Linda pulled another item from her purse, a small brass key on a faded ribbon. In 2005, right before she went into hospice care, Margaret set up a safety deposit box at Pacific Northwest Bank. Inside are treasury bonds worth $200,000, all designated for you. She wanted you to have them when you turned 30, when you'd be old enough to use them wisely, and she hoped old enough to have learned the truth about your adoption. I stared at the key, this tangible proof that someone had loved me, had planned for me, had tried to give me a future even from beyond the grave. Why didn't she just put it in a trust or a will? Because she knew her daughter would find a way to contest it, to claim you were incompetent or undeserving, to tie it up in legal battles that would drain the money fighting over it. A safety deposit box in Margaret's name with specific instructions that only someone with this key and your birth certificate could access it when you turned 30 was harder to steal. Linda set the key on the table between us. I've been paying the annual rental fee for 20 years. I was supposed to give this to you on your 30th birthday in May, but after everything that's happened, I think you should have it now. Beside the key, she placed a sealed envelope yellowed with age and addressed in my grandmother's handwriting, to my granddaughter Grace, to be opened on her 30th birthday. There's a letter inside from Margaret. I've never read it, but I know she wanted you to have her words, her truth. Linda's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Grace, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I gave you away to a woman who hurt you, and I stood by for 30 years while it happened. But I need you to know the truth now before anything else happens. I need you to know that you were wanted, that Margaret loved you fiercely, and that I'm your mother even though I have no right to that title." I picked up the envelope with shaking hands, feeling the weight of my grandmother's words inside words she'd written 20 years ago for this exact moment. I looked at Linda, at this woman who'd watched me grow up from the sidelines, who'd held this devastating secret for 3 decades, who was my biological mother but had given me to her sister, thinking it was an act of love. "I need time," I said finally. "I need to process this, all of it." Linda nodded, tears streaming freely now. "I understand. Take all the time you need. But Grace, please read Margaret's letter. Please get what she left for you. You deserve to finally have something that was meant for you and you alone." I stood to leave the key and envelope clutched in my hands. Linda remained sitting, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her. At the cafe door, I turned back. "Linda," I said, and she looked up with desperate hope. "I'm your mother, Grace. I know I don't deserve to be, but I am. And I'm so, so sorry." I drove home from the cafe with Linda's revelations sitting heavy in my chest and my grandmother's letter unopened on the passenger seat. I couldn't bring myself to read it yet, couldn't process one more truth about who I was and who had failed me. The key to the safety deposit box felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my jacket pocket. It was nearly midnight when I finally walked into my apartment exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and saw the notification one new voicemail received at 11:47 p.m. My father's number. I almost deleted it without listening. But something made me press play, and my father's voice filled my quiet kitchen so weak and broken I barely recognized it. "Gracie, it's Dad. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve your time or your forgiveness." There was a long pause, the sound of ragged breathing. "I'm sorry I was never the father you deserved. I was a coward. I let her hurt you for 30 years. I hurt you. I built a whole other life because I couldn't face what I'd allowed to happen in the first one." His voice cracked completely. "You're the best thing I ever did, and I destroyed it. I destroyed you. I'm so, so sorry, Gracie. The message cut off abruptly, as if he'd hung up mid-sentence, or the voicemail had reached its time limit. I stood there staring at my phone, hearing the echo of his broken apology, and felt nothing but a vast emptiness where anger or sadness should have been. The call came at 6:23 a.m. I was already awake, having barely slept, when an unfamiliar number lit up my screen. A police officer's voice, professional but gentle, told me my father had been found dead in his car outside a residence in Spokane. Heart attack, they suspected. He'd been there all night. A neighbor had noticed the car still running that morning and called it in. Patricia's address. He'd died outside the home of his second family, the one he'd called real. "We found some items in the vehicle," the officer continued. "A handwritten will naming you as sole beneficiary and a sealed letter addressed to you. We'll need you to come identify the body and collect his personal effects." I made the 3-hour drive to Spokane in a fog, going through motions that felt mechanical and distant. At the morgue, I confirmed that the gray, still face was my father, though he looked like a stranger. The letter and will were handed to me in a manila envelope. I didn't open either one. The funeral was arranged quickly and quietly. I chose the smallest service the funeral home offered, unsure who would even come. The church was nearly empty when I arrived, just a handful of people scattered across the pews. Patricia sat in the 3rd row with Emma and Lucas, the children dressed in somber clothes that looked hastily purchased. Emma was crying silently, and Patricia had her arm around the girl's shoulders. When our eyes met, Patricia gave me a small, sad nod of acknowledgement. Claire came alone, wearing a black dress I'd never seen before, her face bare of makeup and her eyes red. She slid into a pew on the opposite side from Patricia, keeping her distance from everyone. Linda stood near the back, and when she saw me, she moved to sit beside me in the front row, a quiet show of support I hadn't asked for, but found myself grateful to receive. The service was brief and impersonal, conducted by a pastor who'd never met my father and could only offer generic platitudes about eternal rest and God's mercy. I didn't cry. I sat perfectly still, feeling like I was watching someone else's funeral mourning someone else's father. Then, as the pastor finished his final prayer, I saw movement at the back of the church. My mother slipped in through the side door, looking gaunt and haunted in a black coat that hung too loose on her frame. Her hair was different, shorter, and badly dyed, as if she'd tried to change her appearance. She took a seat in the very last pew, and when I turned to look at her, our eyes locked across the distance. No words passed between us, but in that long, cold stare I saw everything. Her rage, her desperation, her refusal to accept that she'd lost. And I saw something else, too. Something that looked almost like fear. The reception was held in the church basement, a sad affair of store-bought cookies and weak coffee. I stood by the window, not really talking to anyone, when I felt a presence behind me. Grace. My mother's voice was hoarse, unfamiliar. I need to talk to you. Alone. One last time. Please. I turned to face her, this woman who'd raised me and robbed me, who'd disappeared rather than face consequences, who'd stolen 30 years of my life. She looked smaller now, diminished, but her eyes still held that calculating gleam. Please, she said again, and I saw Patricia watching us from across the room, saw Claire tense in her chair, saw Linda take a protective step forward. I looked at my mother and knew that whatever she wanted to say would be another manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative, another lie wrapped in the language of family obligation. But I also knew I needed to hear it, needed to close this chapter, once and for all. 5 minutes, I said. Outside. Outside the church, my mother and I stood in the cold February drizzle, far enough from the building that no one could overhear us. She looked worse up close, her skin sallow, her hands shaking as she pulled her coat tighter. I'm dying, she said without preamble. The doctors say I have maybe a year, possibly less. Liver failure. I felt nothing. No sympathy, no vindication. Just the same hollow emptiness that had followed me since my father's death. Is that supposed to make me forgive you? No, I know you won't forgive me. I just needed you to know that you won. Her laugh was bitter, broken. You wanted to destroy me, and you did. I have nothing left. No money, no reputation, no home. Even my own body is giving up on me. I didn't want to destroy you, I said quietly. I just wanted you to stop destroying me. We stood in silence for a moment, and then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain without another word. I watched her go, wondering if that was the last time I'd ever see her, and found I didn't particularly care either way. 3 days later, Claire appeared at my apartment door holding a simple wooden box. My father's ashes, she explained, because the funeral home needed someone to claim them, and she didn't know what else to do. I let her in, and we sat across from each other in my living room, like strangers negotiating a fragile truce. She looked different. Thinner, cleaner somehow, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail with no makeup to hide behind. I've been sober for 30 days, she said. Going to therapy twice a week. My therapist says I need to take accountability to make amends where I can. Is that what this is, your 12-step program? No. This is me finally being honest with you. She set the box of ashes on my coffee table. I suggested stealing the $50,000 because I was jealous, Grace. You had everything I wanted. A real career, independence, respect. You'd built a life on your own merit while I was still trying to buy people's approval with things I couldn't afford. I convinced myself you owed me something, that you had it easy because you didn't have the pressure of being the real daughter. She laughed bitterly. How twisted is that I had every advantage and I still resented you. I watched her carefully looking for signs of manipulation, but all I saw was genuine shame. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to hear the truth. And because I need to start paying you back." She pulled an envelope from her purse and set it on the table between us. Inside was a check for $10,000. "I sold my car and most of my jewelry. It's not nearly enough, not even close to what I owe you. But it's a start. I'm going to pay you back, Grace, even if it takes the rest of my life." I stared at the check, at this small gesture that couldn't undo years of harm, but represented something I'd never expected from Claire: genuine remorse. "What about Mom?" Claire's face tightened. "She's in a low-income senior facility in Tacoma, early-stage dementia. The doctors say it's progressing fast, probably accelerated by stress and her drinking." She paused. "She's confused most of the time. Sometimes she thinks I'm still in high school. Sometimes she asks when Margaret is coming to visit, like Grandma's still alive. And sometimes she asks about you." "What does she say about me?" "That she needs to talk to you. That you don't understand. That she was only trying to help." Claire looked down at her hands. "I'm not asking you to forgive her, Grace. I know she doesn't deserve that. But I'm asking if you'd see her. Just once. Not for her sake, but maybe for yours. So you can have closure, whatever that looks like for you." I thought about my mother's words outside the church, her claim that she was dying, her insistence that I'd won. I thought about spending the rest of my life wondering what else might have been said, what final truth might have been revealed if I'd given her one more conversation. "Where is she?" Claire pulled a piece of paper from her pocket and slid it across the table. An address in Tacoma, a facility name I didn't recognize. "She's in the memory care wing. They'll let you in if you say you're family, though I guess that's technically not true anymore, is it?" "No," I said, picking up the address. "I guess it's not." Claire stood to leave, hesitating at the door. "Grace, for what it's worth. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed you to hear it from me, not from a lawyer or in a courtroom. I'm sorry for all of it." After she left, I sat alone with my father's ashes and the address of my dying mother, feeling the weight of all these broken relationships pressing down on me. I looked at the check Claire had given me, at this inadequate but genuine attempt at restitution, and made my decision. I picked up my phone and called the facility. "I'd like to schedule a visit," I said, "for Grace Chen. I'm coming to see Margaret Chen." "Are you family?" the receptionist asked. I paused, considering the question. Was I by blood? No. By law? Barely. By any meaningful definition of what family should be? Absolutely not. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm her daughter." I hung up and stared at the address Claire had written down, at this final obligation I was choosing to fulfill, not out of love or duty, but out of a need to finally, definitively close this chapter of my life. "One visit," I said to the empty room. "That's all she gets." The Greenwood Memory Care Facility sat on a quiet street in Tacoma, a low brick building that tried to look cheerful with bright flower boxes that were empty in the winter cold. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside, my hand resting on the envelope in my passenger seat. The receptionist directed me to the common room on the second floor. I walked down hallways that smelled of antiseptic and overcooked vegetables, past elderly residents in wheelchairs and walkers, until I found her sitting alone by a large window overlooking a bare courtyard. My mother looked impossibly small in the institutional armchair, wearing a faded cardigan I didn't recognize, and slippers instead of the heels she'd always insisted on. Her hair, once carefully maintained, was mostly gray now, and cut short in a style that suggested practicality over vanity. She stared out the window at nothing, her hands folded in her lap. When my footsteps approached, she turned and I watched confusion cloud her face, then clear into recognition, then shift into something that looked startlingly like fear. We stared at each other across the worn carpet, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. I pulled a chair over and sat down across from her, maintaining distance. Her eyes tracked my movements with an alertness that surprised me, given what Claire had said about the dementia. "Grace," she said finally, my name coming out like an accusation and a question at the same time. Mom. I replied the word feeling foreign in my mouth. She looked back out the window and I wondered if she was going to pretend I wasn't there, retreat into whatever confused state Claire had described. But when she spoke again, her voice was clear and present. You were always stronger than me. The words came quietly, almost matter of fact. I saw it even when you were little. The way you could take pain and just keep going. The way you didn't need anyone's approval to know your own worth. She turned to look at me, and her eyes were clearer than I'd seen them in months. I hated you for it. I sat very still, afraid that if I moved or spoke, she'd retreat back into denial or manipulation. This raw honesty was something I'd never heard from her before. I hated that you were everything I wasn't, that you had strength I could never find. So I tried to break you down, make you smaller, make you need me the way I needed everyone else's validation. She laughed a sound without humor. I failed at that too. Is that supposed to be an apology? I asked. No, I don't think I'm capable of that. She looked down at her hands, which were shaking slightly. I don't think I ever was. I just wanted you to know that I knew what I was doing, even if I can't hold on to that knowledge much longer. I understood what she meant. The dementia was taking her day by day, and soon even this limited self-awareness would be gone. This was as close to accountability as I would ever get from her, and it wasn't really accountability at all. Just a dying woman admitting she'd seen her own cruelty and chosen it anyway. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I'd prepared. Inside was a key brass and newly cut, and a handwritten note on plain paper. I set it on the small table between us. What's this? She asked. The key to the house on Maple Street. The one Grandma Margaret left to me. The one you stole and sold. I watched her face carefully. I bought it back 6 months ago with money from my own savings. It's mine now legally and completely. This is a copy of the key. She stared at the envelope, not touching it. Why are you giving this to me? I'm not giving it to you. I'm showing you. This doesn't make us even. This doesn't erase what you did. This just makes us done. I stood up, smoothing my coat. You took a house that was meant to be mine. I got it back. You took money that was mine. The courts made you accountable. You tried to take my future, my education, my sense of self-worth. I rebuilt all of it without you. So you won, she said flatly. No, I survived. There's a difference. I picked up my bag. I came here today because Claire asked me to, and because I needed to see you one last time to know that I'm really free of you. And I am. Whatever happens to you now, whatever the dementia takes or leaves, it's not my concern anymore. I walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. Behind me, I heard her voice, smaller now, almost childlike. Will you come back? I stopped my hand on the doorframe and looked back at this woman who had raised me and ruined me, who had given me a name and stolen my inheritance, who had called herself my mother while treating me like property. She looked so small in that chair, so diminished, and I felt nothing but a vast, peaceful emptiness where obligation used to live. No, I said simply. I walked down the hallway without looking back, past the nurse's station, down the stairs, through the lobby, with its artificial cheerfulness. When I pushed through the front doors, February sunlight broke through the clouds cold and clear, and I stood on the front steps breathing in air that felt different, somehow cleaner. I drove home with the windows down despite the cold, letting the wind blow through the car, carrying away the stale air of that facility and everything it represented. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda asking how it went, but I didn't answer yet. I needed to sit with this feeling, this strange lightness that came from finally definitively closing a door I should have closed years ago. I wasn't free because my mother was dying, or because she'd given me something resembling honesty. I was free because I'd chosen to be, because I'd walked into that room and then walked back out without owing her anything. Not forgiveness, not understanding, not even my anger. I was finally completely free. Spring turned to summer, and I found myself rebuilding not just my finances, but my entire understanding of what family and purpose could mean. I'd opened the safety deposit box with Linda beside me, both of us crying as we read my grandmother's letter, her words of love and protection reaching across 20 years to finally find me. The $200,000 in treasury bonds became the foundation for something Margaret would have loved. In June, I signed the lease on a small office space in a mixed-use building downtown and spent 3 weeks transforming it into Margaret's house. The name felt right, honoring the woman who'd tried to protect me when no one else would. The mission was simple: help women over 50 learn technology skills for career changes, provide resume support, offer interview coaching, and create a community where starting over wasn't shameful but celebrated. Linda became my co-director without me even having to ask. She brought decades of administrative experience and a fierce dedication to making sure no other woman felt trapped by circumstance the way she'd been at 20. We decorated the space with comfortable furniture, good coffee, and walls painted a warm yellow that felt like hope. By our official opening in July, we had 12 women enrolled in our first Coding Basics course. 6 months later, we'd helped 47 women get jobs, leave bad situations, or gain the independence to imagine different futures. I taught the technology classes while Linda handled intake interviews and job placement. We met every woman where they were, whether they'd never touched a computer or just needed to update skills that had gone stale during years of caregiving or underemployment. My relationship with Claire evolved slowly, cautiously, like two people learning to walk on broken bones that hadn't quite healed. She'd been sober for 8 months now, working as an administrative assistant at a law firm that wasn't Julia's, paying me $200 every month without fail. The checks arrived with short notes: month 4 of forever, or thank you for not giving up on me, giving up on being terrible. Once a month we met for coffee at a neutral cafe halfway between our apartments. We talked about safe things, mostly her therapy progress, my work at Margaret's house, books we'd read, shows we'd watched. We weren't sisters, not in any traditional sense, but we were no longer enemies either. We were two women trying to figure out how to exist in each other's orbit without causing more damage. Patricia had sent me a Christmas card with a photo of Emma and Lucas, both of them smiling despite everything. She'd included a brief note thanking me for not blaming her children for their father's lies, and saying they were doing okay, taking things day by day. I kept the card on my refrigerator, a reminder that my father's betrayal had hurt more people than just me, and that choosing grace over bitterness was possible even when it wasn't easy. Working at Margaret's house taught me something fundamental about myself that I'd never understood before. Giving wasn't the same as sacrificing. When I helped a 53-year-old woman named Jennifer land her first tech job after 20 years as a stay-at-home mom, when I watched 60-year-old Patricia, a different Patricia, not my father's, learn to code and cry with joy at her first successful program. When I saw women walk in defeated and walk out empowered, I was giving freely. I chose it. No one demanded it, guilted me into it, or made me feel like I owed it as payment for existing. The difference felt like breathing after years underwater, like finally understanding that generosity and exploitation were not the same thing just because they both involved giving. On a Friday in late November, exactly 1 year after my mother had stolen that $50,000, my assistant brought me an envelope that had been left at the front desk. No return address, no postage, just my name, written in shaky, uncertain handwriting across the front. I held it carefully, my heart beating faster. The handwriting looked familiar, but wrong, like someone had tried to forge a signature they could no longer quite remember how to write. I turned it over, looking for any other identifying marks, and found nothing. Linda noticed me standing frozen in my office doorway. "Everything okay?" "I don't know yet," I said, sliding my finger under the envelope's seal. "But I think I'm about to find out." Inside the envelope was a single photograph and a handwritten note on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook. The photo showed my mother as a young woman, maybe 25, standing in front of the house on Maple Street, with her arm around an elderly woman I recognized as my grandmother Margaret. They were both smiling, caught in a moment before everything went wrong. The note was brief, the handwriting deteriorating across the page as if she'd struggled to finish. "I found this in my things. Thought you should have it. Your grandmother loved that house. She would be glad you got it back. I'm sorry I couldn't be who you needed me to be." I stared at those last words for a long time, this closest thing to an apology my mother had ever managed. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was something. I tucked the photo into my desk drawer and threw the note away, letting go of even this small gesture because I didn't need it anymore. What I needed, what had saved me, was already mine. I thought back to that day 6 months ago when Linda and I had walked into Pacific Northwest Bank with the key my grandmother had left behind. The manager had led us to the vault, and with trembling hands I'd opened box number 247 for the first time in 20 years. The treasury bonds had been there exactly as Linda promised, their value grown over 2 decades to just over $200,000. But what had broken me, what had made me sink to the floor of that sterile bank vault and sob until I couldn't breathe, was the stack of photographs underneath. Pictures of my grandmother holding me as a newborn, of Linda young and scared, but smiling at the camera of the three of us together in moments I'd never known existed. At the bottom was a letter in my grandmother's shaky handwriting dated March 2005, 3 months before she died. "My dearest Grace," it began. "If you're reading this, it means you survived them and Linda found the courage to tell you the truth. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. I tried, but my daughter was always cleverer than me, always one step ahead. This money is yours, not for what they took, but for what you'll build. Your real birthday is May 14th, 1995, not the date on the false birth certificate. Happy 30th birthday, my brave girl. You were wanted. You were loved. You were treasured. Love always, Grandma Margaret." Now, standing outside Margaret's house on a cool November evening, I watched women of all ages stream through the doors for our evening coding class. Linda pulled into the parking lot, locked her car, and walked over to stand beside me. We didn't speak, just stood together in comfortable silence, watching the community we'd built from my grandmother's gift and my determination to turn pain into purpose. A woman I recognized as Sarah, 56, and recently divorced after 30 years of marriage, pushed through the front doors clutching a folder to her chest. When she saw me, her face lit up and she rushed over, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I got it," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "The job at the tech startup. They said my skills were exactly what they needed. Grace, you gave me my life back. I thought I was too old, too far behind, but you showed me I could start over." She hugged me tightly, and I hugged her back, feeling the weight of her gratitude, and knowing that this moment, this work, this choice to give freely instead of being drained dry was what my grandmother had wanted for me all along. After Sarah went home, Linda and I stood in the parking lot as the last light faded from the sky. I thought about that $50,000 stolen exactly 1 year ago, the violation that had cracked open my carefully maintained denial and forced me to see the truth. I thought about the $200,000 my grandmother had left me, about the house on Maple Street that was mine again, about the legal victories and the painful revelations and the slow, difficult work of rebuilding. But mostly I thought about the difference between being used and being generous, between giving out of fear and giving out of love. For 30 years I'd been taught that I owed my family everything for the privilege of being raised by them. Now I knew the truth. I'd owed them nothing, and they'd stolen everything anyway. "Ready to go home?" Linda asked softly. I looked at the sign above the door, Margaret's house, painted in letters my grandmother would have loved, and smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I'm ready." $50,000 later, I finally owned something priceless. Not revenge, though I'd had that too. Not money, though I'd recovered what was mine. But peace. Real, lasting peace. And the knowledge that I wasn't my mother's daughter after all. I was Margaret's granddaughter. And that made all the difference. And that's where Grace's story ends. But maybe yours is just beginning. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to every twist, every betrayal, and every hard-won victory in Grace's journey from victim to survivor. This story is about more than just stolen money. It's about recognizing when love has become manipulation, when family has become exploitation, and when the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. If Grace's story resonated with you, if you've ever felt trapped by obligation to people who didn't deserve your loyalty, or if you're still finding the courage to set boundaries with toxic family members, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me what moment in this story hit you the hardest. Was it when Grace finally confronted her mother at the Christmas party, when she discovered her father's second family, or when she realized that Linda was her biological mother? Your comments help me understand what stories matter to you most. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. I share true stories of revenge justice and people who refuse to stay victims every single week. Stories like Grace's remind us that we're not alone in our struggles, that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, and that sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into. Remember, you don't owe anyone your peace. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because they share your DNA. And you definitely don't owe anyone forgiveness when they've shown you exactly who they are. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.